Hello, curious minds, and welcome to Documentary for Sleep. If you're here tonight, maybe your thoughts are still buzzing, or maybe you just want a calm story to carry you toward rest. Either way, you found a quiet space for wandering together. Whether you're lying in bed, drifting closer to sleep, or letting this play softly in the background while you work, cook, or pass the late hours of the night, this is your moment to slow down and reflect. Tonight, we'll explore something strange and deeply human: the way our brains shape reality. The world you see, the memories you keep, even the truths you believe, none of them are exact mirrors of the outside world. They are reconstructions, filtered and sometimes distorted by the limits and quirks of the human mind. Why would evolution give us a brain that bends reality instead of revealing it perfectly? That's the question we'll wander into. We don't claim to have every answer. But what we do have are the insights from neuroscience, psychology, and evolutionary theory that reveal how perception and reality can quietly drift apart. And if you happen to fall asleep along the way, that's completely fine. This is a place where dozing off is part of the experience. I've left timestamps in the description so you can return tomorrow and pick up where you left off. Because this story is worth hearing in full, from the first thought to the last. And if you enjoy this kind of calm, long-form storytelling, gentle science for curious sapiens, consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps this channel reach others who might be looking for a quieter way to learn and wonder. I'd love to hear from you too. Do you listen while lying in bed, while studying, or maybe during a night shift somewhere far away? Share your moment with us. It's always fascinating to see where this quiet community stretches. And as always, stay curious, stay calm. A witness at the scene of an accident describes the red car that caused the crash. The security footage, however, reveals a blue one. So who is mistaken? Or is their brain simply telling its own version of the story? This common courtroom drama reveals a profound truth about the machinery of our minds. We like to imagine our perception as a high-fidelity camera, faithfully recording the world in real time for later review. But the brain is not a passive recording device. It is an active, relentless, and masterful storyteller. It does not simply capture light and sound. It constructs, edits, and narrates our reality from the raw, ambiguous data provided by our senses. It works not like a camera, but like a filmmaker in a dimly lit editing room, piecing together a coherent film from out-of-focus shots and fragmented audio, constantly guessing what should come next based on the script of past experience. Neuroscientists call this top-down processing, the brain applying its pre-existing models and expectations to shape the chaotic, bottom-up signals from our eyes and ears. It is less about seeing what is, and more about seeing what it expects and needs to see. To understand why such a seemingly flawed system would evolve, we must journey back through the deep corridors of time, to our ancient ancestors on the sun-baked savanna. For a Homo erectus, the premium was not on pixel-perfect accuracy. It was on speed and survival. There was no evolutionary advantage in memorizing the exact number of stripes on a tiger or the precise hue of its fur. The crucial calculation was far simpler, far more brutal. A low-slung silhouette, a flash of movement in the tall grass, a suggestive pattern. Danger. The brain evolved to prioritize rapid categorization and efficient simplification over meticulous detail. It was a brilliant, life-saving shortcut. See a suggestive pattern, assume a predator, and run. Better to mistake a waving bush for a saber-tooth than to mistake a saber-tooth for a waving bush. This ancient survival mechanism echoes powerfully in our modern world, often with unsettling consequences. The phenomenon of false memory and unreliable eyewitness testimony in courtrooms is a direct legacy of this neural storytelling. Each of us is the director of the film playing inside our head, and we are proven so spectacularly effective. How did we cross oceans, compose symphonies, and build civilizations with a tool that fundamentally distorts its raw material? How can we feel such certain love or conviction if it is all built upon a foundation of educated guesses and neural shortcuts? The very fact that we are here to ponder these questions suggests that this system of illusion is not a bug in our hardware, but its most sophisticated feature. Perhaps the answer lies not in the clear light of day, but in the twilight shadows of our deepest past. It begins with the first survival illusion, the shape of a predator glimpsed from the corner of an eye, a rustle in the grass that could be the wind, but just might be death. In that moment of uncertainty, a choice was made, not by a conscious mind, but by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. A choice that valued precaution over precision, assumption over inaction. What if our greatest strength and our most profound flaw were born from the very same source? From a primal need to see the monster in the shadows, even when it isn't there. A rustle in the leaves, a flicker of shadow. Your ancestors ran. Even if it was just the wind, so what? The question was never about right or wrong. It was about alive or not. This primal moment, this electric jolt of fear at an ambiguous signal, is perhaps our first and most fundamental illusion. It is the original survival software, a glitch written so deep into our code that it has become a feature. We stand on the savannah of the modern world, our hearts still pounding to an ancient rhythm, forever seeing predators in the tall grass. At the biological core of this experience lies a fundamental bias hardwired into our neural architecture. The brain is not a dispassionate supercomputer. It is a paranoid survival machine equipped with a hair-trigger alarm system. Deep within, the limbic system, our ancient emotional core, operates on a simple, brutal principle. When presented with incomplete or ambiguous information, assume the worst. This detector bias prioritizes threat detection above all else. A faint shape, a broken twig, a low growl in the darkness. The brain would rather flag 100 harmless shadows as potential threats than miss the one that carries claws and teeth. This neural shortcut, this tendency to see agency and intention in random events, is the very bedrock upon which our capacity for illusion, anxiety, and overreaction is built. It is the price of a ticket to the present, paid for in the currency of constant, low-grade vigilance. This price, for our ancestors, was a bargain. In the vast, open grasslands where humanity took its first steps, the calculus of survival was brutally clear. The cost of a false positive, jumping at a gust of wind, was a momentary spike of adrenaline and a slight loss of energy. The cost of a false negative, failing to jump at an actual predator, was oblivion. Evolution, that ruthless accountant, favored the nervous, the jumpy, the ones who saw a lion in every rustling bush. They were the ones who lived long enough to pass on their genes, and with them, this exquisite sensitivity to perceived danger. We are the children of the anxious, the heirs to a legacy of seeing what isn't there, morphing into the chronic stress and free-floating anxiety that defines so much of contemporary life. We are still running from shadows, but now the chase is internal, and the grass is the tangled field of our own minds. Yet, this hypervigilance, this gift that ensured our survival, has a dark and double edge. The reflex to act first and ask questions later, so advantageous on the ancient plane, leaves us profoundly vulnerable in a complex society. It is the engine behind the viral spread of misinformation, where a shocking headline triggers our threat response before our reasoning mind can engage. It fuels mob mentality and moral panics, where the fear of one becomes the terror of all, short-circuiting individual judgment. In our rush to escape the shadow, we can trample the truth. And in our desire for safety, we can create even greater danger. The very mechanism designed to protect us can become a cage of its own making, locking us into cycles of reaction and fear. So we are left with a haunting, inherent paradox. If our own mind so readily warps reality for the sake of survival, what else might it be distorting without our conscious knowledge? Can we ever truly trust a perception that is, by its very design, flawed in favor of keeping us breathing? To navigate the world, we must first learn to see the warp in the lens itself, to understand the subtle, persistent distortions of our internal machinery. For if this is how we see the lions, how then do we see everything else? You walk into a supermarket, your eyes scanning the brightly colored tags. A bold 30% off flashes, a siren call to your wallet. You place the item in your cart, a quiet hum of satisfaction in your chest. You've made a smart choice, a savvy financial move. But what if that feeling of shrewdness is itself the product? You haven't just found a deal. You've fallen into a trap meticulously constructed by a master architect, your own brain. This is the realm of the heuristic, a mental shortcut. It's fast, efficient, and very often wrong. At its core, this is a story of biological necessity. The human brain, for all its majesty, is an energy glutton, consuming a staggering 20% of the body's resources while accounting for only 2% of its mass. To manage the relentless, overwhelming flood of data from our senses, the hum of lights, the chatter of people, the texture of the air, it cannot afford to be a perfectionist. It must be a pragmatist. So, it builds shortcuts, neural algorithms that simplify complex problems into manageable rules of thumb. It looks for familiar patterns, past experiences, anything to avoid the exhausting work of calculating every single variable from scratch. This isn't a design flaw. It's a feature that kept the system from crashing. It is the difference between a leisurely stroll and a frantic, minute-by-minute analysis of every muscle fiber required to walk. These pathways are ancient, carved deep by the relentless chisel of survival. For our ancestors on the savannah, hesitation was not an option. A rustle in the tall grass was not a subject for debate. It was a prompt for action. The rule, red fruit equals poison, was a better bet than the costly experiment of a taste test. A sudden, loud sound demanded a jump into fight or flight, not a pondering of its acoustic properties. These heuristics were life-saving algorithms, allowing for split-second decisions in a world of immediate physical consequences. The brain that paused to thoroughly analyze the predator's motives was a brain that did not get to pass on its genes. We are the children of the impatient, the jumpy, the decisively rash. Yet, the very machinery that once saved us from lions now misfires in the chamber, built one cognitive shortcut at a time. The consequences ripple through our society. Misinformation spreads not because people are inherently foolish, but because a compelling story that fits a pre-existing pattern is neurologically easier to accept than a complex, inconvenient truth. Our digital landscapes become battlegrounds not of facts, but of competing heuristics, where the most emotionally resonant shortcut wins, obscuring reality beneath layers of cognitive convenience. And yet, to imagine a life without these shortcuts is to imagine a form of paralysis. If every choice, from which brand of toothpaste to buy, to how to interpret a colleague's offhand comment, required a full, unbiased cost-benefit analysis, we would be frozen in a forest of endless possibilities. We would never leave our homes, never form an opinion, never act. The very efficiency that sometimes leads us astray is also what allows us to function at all. Our heuristics are the autopilot that frees up conscious thought for the truly novel problems, the unexpected challenges. The question, then, is not how to eliminate them, but how to navigate them. The real challenge lies in developing a sense of when to trust the autopilot and when to grab the controls with conscious, deliberate force. It is about learning to suspect our own instincts, to question the very feelings of certainty that our brains so convincingly manufacture. But in the heat of the moment, when fear or pride or tribe loyalty screams its simple, compelling truth, can we truly separate the primal whisper from the rational voice? And if this ancient system of shortcuts is so deeply woven into the fabric of our perception, how can we ever be sure that what we see is the world as it is, and not merely the world as our brain has hastily, efficiently, and deceptively assembled it for us? This internal conflict suggests the battle is not merely behavioral, but anatomical. Perhaps the answer lies not in the conscious mind at all, but in the dark, ancient recesses of the brain where a more primal fear resides. You know, rationally, that speaking in front of a crowd won't kill you. The PowerPoint clicker is not a weapon. The expectant faces are not a firing squad. Yet your palms sweat. Your heart hammers against your ribs like a trapped animal trying to escape its cage. This is not a sign of weakness, a personal failing you must overcome. This is something far older, far more deeply etched into the very fabric of your being. It is the ghost of a 2-million-year-old brain, whispering a desperate, urgent warning about the most dangerous predator of all, the ancient tribe. Deep within the cathedral of your skull, in the shadowy, archaic chambers of the limbic system, rests a small, almond-shaped cluster of neurons called the amygdala. This is the sentinel, the watchman that never sleeps. It operates on a timeline that predates language, logic, or the concept of a quarterly review. Its processing is breathtakingly fast, a raw electrochemical scream that bypasses the slower, more deliberate court of your conscious mind. It is the part of you that flinches before you consciously register the shape of a snake on the path, that gasps before you understand the shadow was just a trick of the light. The amygdala is the curator of fear, and its collection is ancient. It does not deal in abstractions. It deals in survival. And its most profound discovery, coded into our ancestors over millennia, is that social rejection feels, in every measurable neurological way, exactly like dying. To understand this primal wiring, we must journey back to a world without safety nets. Imagine the vast savanna grasslands where the horizon promised both sustenance and threat. For our ancestors, life was a precarious thread stretched taut between the elements. In such a world, the tribe was not a social club. It was the cradle of existence itself. It was warmth against the chill, many eyes against the predators, many hands to gather food and build shelter. To be cast out was not a mere emotional wound. It was a death sentence. A solitary human was a dead human. The sting of a sideways glance, the sharp word of disapproval from an elder, the chilling silence of exclusion. These were not minor social review, the curated perfection of a social media feed. Yet, the sentinel remains. It has not received the software update. It cannot tell the difference between a lion's roar and the cold silence following a poorly received text message. It processes the snide comment in a meeting and the barrage of negative comments on a post with the same primordial urgency it once reserved for the rustle in the tall grass. The physiological response is identical. The cortisol flood, the adrenaline surge, the hypervigilance, the desperate urge to flee or fawn. This is the source of our modern anxieties, the social phobia that tightens our throats, the fear of missing out that whispers of being left behind and forgotten, the deep, aching dread of being canceled, a digital age exile that the amygdala interprets with 2-million-year-old terror. And yet, to label this ancient neural knot as merely a dysfunctional relic would be to misunderstand its profound utility. The amygdala is not just the source of our irrational fears. It is also the wellspring of our intuition. It is the gut feeling that tells us to cross the street before we consciously notice the threatening figure in the alleyway. It is the subconscious read of a micro-expression that warns us of deceit. It is the deep, wordless love that floods a parent when their child is in danger. This sentinel, for all its sometimes comical misfires, is a fundamental part of our protective architecture. We cannot simply silence it, for in doing so, we would lose a part of our humanity, a deep connection to the instinctual wisdom that has guided our species for eons. The challenge, then, is not to declare war on this ancient part of ourselves, but to learn its language, to sit with its frantic messages, acknowledge its outdated but well-intentioned warnings, and gently, with the reasoning power of our modern cortex, inform it that the tribe is now global, that a sideways glance is not a death warrant, and that we are, for the most part, safe. This leaves us suspended in a curious state of being, a permanent negotiation between the old world and the new. If this ancient, instinctual core, the amygdala with its primal fears and fierce protections, still holds such sway over the modern mind, then what is the true but to seek certainty? A comforting lie that assures our place in the tribe can often feel far more stable, far more survivable, than a complicated, messy truth that threatens to isolate us. This is the fertile ground where belief systems take root, where ideologies harden, where prejudices find their stubborn hold. But that is a journey for another time. A journey into the stories we tell ourselves to feel safe in a terrifyingly uncertain world. There's a peculiar comfort in being wrong, a quiet dignity in admitting a mistake. But there is a far deeper, more primal terror in not knowing. So we cling to our convictions, even in the face of mounting contradictory evidence. We dig our heels into the shifting sands of reality and declare the ground solid. This isn't mere stubbornness. It is a biological imperative. The human brain does not hunger for truth. It hungers for certainty. It would rather be confidently wrong than hesitantly uncertain. Imagine your brain not as a library of facts, but as a master cartographer, tirelessly drawing and redrawing maps of your world. Its primary function is prediction. Every second, it is flooded with a chaotic storm of sensory data, the hum of a computer, the pressure of the chair against your skin, the faint scent of coffee from another room. To make sense of this cacophony, it must find patterns. It must predict what a sound means, what a shadow portends, what a facial expression implies. This predictive engine, centered in the prefrontal cortex, works in a constant, tense dialogue with the ancient emotional core of the brain, the limbic system. When predictions fail, when the map no longer matches the territory, a neural alarm is tripped. Uncertainty registers as a error signal, a cognitive itch, a deep and distressing threat to the system's equilibrium. This state of not knowing is neurologically expensive, metabolically draining. It feels, quite simply, like danger. So the brain rushes to resolve it, to smooth over the discrepancy, to create a story, any story, that restores a sense of order. The need for a coherent narrative outweighs the need for a perfectly accurate one. We can trace the deep roots of this intolerance for ambiguity back to the savannas of our ancestors. For them, the world was not a puzzle to be solved at leisure. It was a minefield of immediate peril. The rustle in the tall grass presented a binary choice with life or death consequences. Is it just the wind, or is it a predator? Hesitation, the desire for more data, the philosophical pondering of probabilities. These were luxuries that evolution swiftly selected against. The individual who waited to be absolutely sure of the leopard's presence of digital information. The clear and present danger of a predator has been supplanted by the abstract, slow-moving threats of climate change or a global pandemic. But our Paleolithic brain, with its ancient wiring, applies the same old rules to these new complex problems. Faced with a deluge of conflicting scientific reports, political rhetoric, and social media narratives, the modern mind does what it has always done. It seeks the simplest, most certain story. It gravitates towards the clean, compelling lines of a conspiracy theory rather than the tangled, provisional, and ever-evolving narrative of evidence-based science. A complex truth about vaccine development, requiring an understanding of clinical trials and viral mutations, creates cognitive dissonance. A simple story about profit and control offers immediate, visceral certainty. It feels true because it feels solid. We trade the cumbersome weight of logic for the comforting, feather-light illusion of safety. In our search for a map, we gladly accept a child's drawing if it promises to show us the way. But here lies the profound paradox, the trap hidden within our own design. This very craving for certainty, which once ensured our survival, now makes us vulnerable. A mind that has arrived at a conclusion, that has sealed itself in the airtight container of absolute belief, is a mind that has stopped looking. It becomes blind to new evidence, deaf to counter-arguments. It sees disagreement not as a difference of perspective, but as a personal attack or willful ignorance. This cognitive closure is the fertile ground for manipulation. The demagogue, the advertiser, the propagandist, they are not peddlers of fact, they are merchants of certainty. They offer the powerful, addictive relief of a simple answer, a clear enemy, a promised land. They give the brain exactly what it craves, short-circuiting the difficult, arduous path to a more nuanced understanding. In our desperate flight from the anxiety of not knowing, we can willingly march into a cage of someone else's making. So if our most fundamental sense of reality, our convictions, our beliefs, the very ground we stand on, is so easily shaped by a neural mechanism that prioritizes comfort over correctness, what can we truly claim to know? If absolute, you see the optical illusion, two lines of equal length, yet one stubbornly appears longer. The problem isn't with your eyes. They are faithfully capturing the light. The problem, the beautiful and fundamental flaw, lies in the silent, relentless construction project happening behind them. Your brain is not a camera. It is a storyteller, an architect, a master of ceremonies in the grand theater of your mind, and it is building the world you see from a cascade of photons and a library of assumptions. This act of seeing is a biological miracle, a cascade of electrochemical whispers. Light, reflected off the world, enters the eye and strikes the retina, a sheet of living tissue. But this is not a photographic plate. It is a first draft, a chaotic sketch. Here, specialized neurons don't just record, they immediately begin to edit. They emphasize edges, detect motion, and contrast shadows. This preliminary report is then dispatched, not as a perfect image, but as a frenetic, fragmented Morse code of impulses racing along the optic nerve into the dark vault of the skull. The destination is the visual cortex, a sprawling command center at the back of the brain. And here, the true magic, or deception, unfolds. It is here that the brain weaves its story. It receives these fragmented signals and begins a process of breathtaking synthesis. But this is not a passive reception. Neuroscientists now understand that up to 90% of what we consciously see is not a direct recording of the incoming light data. It is a prediction. The brain is a master of anticipation, constantly generating a model of the world based on past experience, context, and survival needs. It predicts the fall of light, the texture of bark, the trajectory of a moving object. The signals from the eyes are merely used to check and, if necessary, slightly correct this ongoing internal simulation. We do not see the light itself. we experience the brain's best, most efficient guess about the source of that light. So, when you look at a friend's face, you are not seeing them in real time. You are witnessing a meticulously crafted portrait, painted by predictions and confirmed by a luxury. Speed was the currency of survival. The brain evolved a brutal calculus. It is better to mistakenly see a snake that isn't there than to fail to see the one that is. This evolutionary heritage hardwired us for inference over accuracy, for pattern recognition over perfect perception. Our vision became a tool not for truth, but for survival, heavily biased toward seeing what we needed to see, or worse, what we most feared to see. What ancient ghosts, what primal fears, still shape the shadows we see in the corners of our modern, well-lit rooms. This ancient machinery, so exquisitely tuned for the dangers of the wild, now operates in a world it could never have imagined. We have weaponized its vulnerabilities. The modern world is a carnival of visual deception designed to hijack these primal pathways. The magician's sleight of hand, the forced perspective of architecture, the uncanny valley of a deepfake video, the curated perfection of a social media filter. Each is a key that fits perfectly into the lock of our perceptual system. They feed our brain a carefully crafted signal that it is evolutionarily compelled to accept as real. A filter smooths skin and enlarges eyes, tapping into deep-seated cues of health and youth. A deepfake seamlessly grafts one person's expressions onto another's body, exploiting our neural expertise in reading faces. We know, intellectually, that these images are manipulated, yet a visceral part of us, the old part that trusts the story the brain tells, is convinced. The gap between the light entering our eyes and the reality it represents has never been wider, yet our faith in the image has never been more complete and more easily exploited. If our own biology can be so readily tricked into believing a fiction, where does that leave our grasp on what is real? And yet, there is a curious comfort in a shared illusion. The Mueller-Lyer illusion, with its two equal lines, fools nearly everyone. We all see the same lie. This points to a profound truth. Our individual hallucinations are not random. They are structured by a common biological blueprint. This shared wiring creates a common ground of perception, a consensus reality. If we all fall for the same trick, is the trick not in its own? Did not emerge in a vacuum. It was forged and is constantly reinforced in a crucible far older than any individual. The tribe. Our perception was never meant to be a solitary pursuit. It was honed for the group, for the collective, for survival within a tight-knit unit where seeing what others saw, or agreeing that you did, was often more important than seeing what was actually there. The need to belong, to conform, to hold a shared vision of the world may be the most powerful filter of all, one that shapes not just what we see, but what we are willing to believe we have seen. And if our most trusted sense is a negotiable story, a consensus reality built by a fallible organ for a tribal world, what does that say about the other stories we tell ourselves? The stories about who we are, who they are, and what is truly real. The child stands alone in the clearing, a small figure against the towering judgment of the village. No one saw her cast a spell. No one witnessed a blighted crop spring from her fingertips. Yet the conviction is absolute, but truth forged not in the fire of evidence, but in the cool, collective certainty of the group. She is a witch because they say she is. This is not mere ignorance. It is the terrifying, magnificent power of collective belief, conjuring its own reality. We are a species that does not just discover the world. We build it, brick by psychic brick, through shared agreement. And the mortar that holds this fragile construction together is our deep, biological, and ancient need to belong. At the very core of this phenomenon is a neurological script written over millennia. We are, by design, profoundly social creatures. Our brains are not cold, isolated logic machines. They are exquisitely tuned instruments for social harmony. When we express an opinion that aligns with our group, something remarkable happens deep within our skull. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, a region associated with complex thought and decision-making, hums with approval. Simultaneously, the reward circuitry, the same neural pathways ignited by a satisfying meal or social praise, floods with dopamine. It is a chemical celebration of consensus. Our brain, in its ancient wisdom, literally rewards us for agreeing, for fitting in. The feeling of being right is neurologically intertwined with the feeling of being accepted. Is it any wonder, then, that we so often choose the comforting warmth of belonging over the cold, lonely precipice of dissent? The truth, it seems, feels less important than the tribe that defines it. This neurological imperative finds its roots on the ancient savanna, where the first human tribes learned the stark arithmetic of survival. For a hunter-gatherer, exile was not a philosophical concept. It was a death sentence. The predators lurking beyond the firelight were less immediately terrifying than the prospect of being cast out from the protective circle of the clan. In this world, objective truth was a luxury, the story that felt truer than the bleak indifference of the universe. The village square has now expanded to a global, digital scale, but the ancient circuitry remains unchanged. Social media platforms are nothing less than hypercharged, global tribes, each with its own distinct territory, language, and set of unquestionable truths. We curate our feeds and thus our realities, algorithmically herded into echo chambers that constantly reassure us of our shared rightness. In one digital camp, a set of facts is held as self-evident. In another, just a scroll away, those same facts are dismissed as heretical propaganda. From politics to wellness culture, from established science to fervent conspiracy, each group operates within its own hermetically sealed universe of belief. The evidence presented is not evaluated on a sterile scale of objectivity, but on whether it feels true to the group's narrative. We have not evolved beyond our ancestors. We have simply given their primal instincts a broadband connection. We are still hunting for acceptance, still gathering validation, and the modern mythologies we construct are just as potent, just as real to us, as any ancient spirit in the storm. If reality is a story we tell together, what happens when we all start reading from different books? This, of course, leads us to the precipice of a profound and unsettling question. If our reality is so malleable, so contingent on the whims of the tribe, then what becomes of objective truth? Is everything merely relative? A matter of perspective? A story that can be rewritten by a sufficiently large or loud enough group? The child accused of witchcraft would certainly argue otherwise. The rock is, in a physical sense, still just a rock, regardless of the spirit we project onto it. This is the eternal tension, the friction between the world as it is and the world as we need it to be, in order to live together. Our collective fictions are powerful, but do they have the final word? Or is there a bedrock of reality beneath our stories, waiting patiently for us to stumble upon it? Or perhaps the very search for a single, objective truth is itself a kind of tribal story, a myth told by the tribe of science. To untangle when thunder cracks across the night sky, splitting the darkness with a violence of light, our ancestors did not speak of colliding ions or atmospheric electrical discharges. They did not see a random, indifferent, natural process. They saw a face in the clouds, a temperament in the tumult. They whispered, "The god is angry." And in that moment, the terrifying, chaotic, and incomprehensible became something else entirely. A story. A world with intention, however fierce, is a world that can be understood. A world that can be pleaded with, appeased, and navigated. It is a world where one is not merely a victim of chance, but a participant in a grand, albeit mysterious, dialogue. This primal, human impulse to narrate, to weave cause and effect into a tapestry of meaning, is the very cradle of myth and ritual. It is how we first learn to hold the vast, star-dusted emptiness of existence and feel, not terror, but a fragile sense of place. Our brains are ancient machines of pattern recognition, honed by evolution not for truth, but for survival. They despise randomness. A rustle in the grass is never just a rustle. It is a potential predator. The brain that assumes it is a predator and flees lives to pass on its genes, while the one that pauses to statistically analyze the source of the sound may not. This neural wiring, this deep-seated allergy to coincidence, is the engine of myth-making. When famine strikes or a child falls ill, the mind rebels against the unbearable notion that it simply happened. It scrambles, desperate for a thread to pull, a reason to assign. So, it invents one. It constructs a narrative. We have offended the earth spirit. We have neglected the ancestors. We have broken a sacred taboo. This invented cause, however frightening, is preferable to the existential void of no cause at all. It offers a lever, however illusory, with which to move the world. A ritual of apology, a sacrifice, a chant. These become the tools to pull that lever. This is not ignorance. It is a brilliant, desperate cognitive workaround. It is the mind building a raft of story to cross an ocean of smoke of a fire. These were not attempts to control the weather in a scientific sense, but to control the meaning of the weather. They were a symbolic language spoken between humanity and the immense, silent forces that governed their lives. To perform the ritual correctly was to maintain the covenant, to keep the story intact, and to hold chaos at bay for one more day. The world remained dangerous, but it was no longer meaningless. One might assume that the bright electric light of modernity has dispelled these ancient shadows. We have equations for the thunder and satellites to predict the storm. Yet, the old engine of the brain still hums within its cage of bone. We have not abandoned ritual. We have simply laundered it through a modern lexicon. We no longer sacrifice goats for a bountiful harvest, but we don ceremonial caps and gowns to cross a stage and receive a scroll, a ritual transformation from student to graduate. We exchange not gifts to appease family spirits, but rings to symbolize a union, followed by a meticulously choreographed sequence of cake cutting, first dances, and thrown bouquets. An athlete wears the same lucky socks for a big game. A traveler fears a black cat crossing their path. We smile at these superstitions, yet we perform them. They are the ghost of the old magic, the whisper of a need that data cannot satisfy. And on a grander scale, our modern belief systems, the fervor of political ideology, the devotion to a brand, the mythologies of popular culture, function with the same architecture as ancient pantheons. They provide a shared story, a set of symbols, and a feeling of belonging to something larger than ourselves. They are the new myths that help us navigate the terrifying complexity of a globalized, digitized world, proving that our need for narrative is not a phase in human development, but its very condition. But a story, for all its comfort, is a tool. And like any tool, it can become a weapon in the wrong hands. The same mechanism that built comforting myths to explain the rain can be harnessed to construct devastating lies to control a population. When a narrative is not born from a collective search for meaning, but is imposed from a hunger for power, the concept creatures, neurologically wired to impose narrative order on sensory chaos. This gift allowed us to build civilizations and cultures, to find our feet on a rock spinning through nothingness. But what happens when the story takes precedence over the truth it was meant to explain? What happens when the brain, so adept at crafting tales to understand the world, begins instead to aggressively warp the world to fit a tale it refuses to relinquish? The line between meaning-making and dogma, between a shared myth and a dangerous delusion, is terrifyingly thin. It forces us to ask not which stories we tell, but what those stories tell us to do. And perhaps the most profound question of all is whether we are even capable of separating the need for a story from the need for it to be true. If the stories we cling to are not ultimately about truth, but about something else entirely, then what is the real currency of our belief? You are at a party. The room is warm, buzzing with the easy rhythm of shared laughter. A story is being told, a humorous anecdote about a celebrity's latest blunder. You know, with absolute certainty, that the facts are wrong. The event never happened that way. You read the real story just this morning. Yet, when the punchline lands and the circle erupts in laughter, you feel your own mouth curve into a smile. You might even chuckle. Not because you believe the tale, but because the alternative, the silence, the corrected fact hanging awkwardly in the air, the sudden shift of attention toward you, the outsider, feels like a social abyss. In this moment, a profound truth about the human condition reveals itself. The feeling of belonging can outweigh the weight of truth itself. This is not a simple moral failing. It is a deep, ancient wiring within us. To understand it, we must journey into the very architecture of the brain, into the wet, chemical darkness where our social selves are forged. Nestled within our neural pathways is a sophisticated social reward system. When our actions or expressed beliefs align us with our tribe, a potent neurotransmitter, dopamine, floods our system. This is the same chemical associated with pleasure from food, sex, and other primal rewards. It is a biological stamp of approval, an internal fireworks display that whispers, "Yes, this is good. You are safe. You are one of us." Conversely, the threat of social exclusion triggers a different, more primal network. The same neural pathways that process physical pain. An fMRI scan would show the anterior cingulate cortex, a region known to light up in response to a broken bone or a burn, glowing with identical urgency when we experience rejection or ostracism. Our biology makes no distinction. A wound is a wound, whether inflicted by a claw or a cold shoulder. So, we are presented with a neurological dilemma. Do we choose the mental discomfort of cognitive dissonance, holding a belief that contradicts the group, or do we opt for the searing, visceral pain of social exile? The brain, in its ruthless efficiency, often chooses the former. The need to belong is not just a desire, but as masterful social tacticians. We learned, unconsciously, to sand down the rough edges of our dissenting opinions, to subtly adjust our memories to better align with the group's narrative, to laugh at the joke we didn't quite understand. The goal was not to possess an objective reality, but to maintain a vital social position. Reality was a secondary concern to the immediate, pounding drumbeat of social survival. In this context, the conformist was not a fool, but an evolutionary success story. Does this mean our very identity is, and always has been, a negotiation between the self and the tribe? The savanna has been replaced by the cityscape. the hunting party by the political party, the tribal fire by the glow of the smartphone screen. Yet the ancient code within us continues to run, often with chaotic and startling consequences. The stakes of banishment are no longer literal death, but the brain, steeped in its old fears, reacts as if they are. We see this play out in the modern arena with terrifying clarity. The football fan who vehemently defends a blatantly bad call by the referee, not out of blindness, but out of unwavering loyalty to the team, the tribe. The political partisan who dismisses damning evidence against their chosen leader, not after careful consideration, but as a reflexive defense of the group's identity. And most vividly, in the digital coliseum of social media, where algorithms expertly curate our tribes and amplify our signals. Here, we like, share, and defend information not after a rigorous fact check, but based on a far simpler calculation. Which version of events will earn me the dopamine hit of approval from my digital in-group? Which stance will protect me from the pain of social cancellation? This is the fertile ground where misinformation spreads not like a disease, but like a bonding ritual. It is the engine of extremism, where beliefs are radicalized not through evidence, but through the escalating need to prove one's loyalty, to belong more fiercely than anyone else. Has our technology simply given our most ancient instincts a megaphone? This brings us to an unsettled gain admission to a larger, more powerful story. To unravel this paradox, we cannot simply look at our desire for belonging. We must peer deeper into the darkness, into the neural substrata where an even more primal fear resides. For the brain's preference for belonging over fact is itself driven by a more fundamental terror. The true enemy of the human mind is not being wrong, but being lost. The next layer of this exploration leads us to a startling realization. The brain hates ambiguity more than it hates being wrong. This explains why a person will so readily embrace a conspiracy theory, a complete, orderly, if malevolent explanation for events, rather than tolerate the haunting, maddening silence of admitting that no one truly knows what is happening. A clean, simple falsehood is neurologically preferable to a messy, complex truth. Could it be that our allegiance to the tribe is ultimately just a refuge, a desperate flight from the terrifying chaos of not knowing? Imagine, for a moment, a sudden noise in the dark. A floorboard creaks in an empty house. Your heart hammers against your ribs, your muscles tense, ready to spring. Before you even have a conscious thought, your mind has already painted a picture, an intruder, a ghost, a forgotten pet. It rarely offers the most rational and perhaps truest explanation. The old wood of the house contracting in the cool night air. Why? Because your brain would rather believe in a monster it can name than sit quietly with the terrifying, silent question mark. It is a deeply ingrained truth of our existence. Our minds despise ambiguity far more than they dislike being wrong. We will cling to a flawed explanation, a terrible certainty, rather than endure the profound discomfort of simply not knowing. This is not a personal failing, but a fundamental feature of our cognitive wiring. The human brain is, at its core, a prediction engine, a magnificent organ designed for one primary purpose: to reduce uncertainty. Ambiguity is a cognitive threat. It represents a drain on precious metabolic resources, a state of high alert with no clear path for action. Neuroscientists have observed that encountering ambiguous situations triggers a stress response, subtly increasing cortisol levels. This is the chemistry of anxiety, the biological cost of an unanswered question. To defend itself from this taxing state, the brain employs a rapid-fire defense mechanism. It jumps to conclusions. It connects dots that may not be connected, patterns that may not exist. It prefers a swift, coherent narrative, even a flawed one, to the exhausting void of the unknown. This cognitive shortcut, known as abductive reasoning, is a double-edged sword. It is the source of our most brilliant intuitive leaps and the root of our most stubborn prejudices. We see a face in the moon, a shape in the clouds, a conspiracy and a coincidence. The mind would rather be wrong and certain than right but unsure. Is our perception of reality, then, merely the most convenient story we can tell ourselves in the moment? To understand this desperate need for certainty, we must journey back through the deep time of our evolution. For our ancient demons, it devised rituals to appease the angry sky, explanations for the mysterious illness. These narratives, these belief systems, were not primitive failures of logic. They were brilliant cognitive adaptations. They were tools for anxiety reduction, providing a framework to explain the unexplainable, and, in doing so, making the world feel manageable, predictable, and less frightening. Did our earliest myths and religions emerge not from a search for ultimate truth, but from a profound biological intolerance for the anxiety of not knowing? Today, we live in a world our ancestors could scarcely imagine. We have conquered many of the physical ambiguities that plagued them. We understand the mechanics of weather, the germ theory of disease. Yet, the ancient wiring in our brain remains unchanged. If anything, our modern environment has turned this primal instinct against us. We are not starved for information. We are drowning in it. A constant churning ocean of data, news, opinions, and conflicting reports floods our senses every day. This deluge creates a new form of ambiguity, informational chaos. In response, the tired brain, still craving the clarity of the savannah, seeks the simplest, most emotionally satisfying narrative. It gravitates towards the loudest, most confident voice in the digital crowd. Conspiracy theories flourish not because people are foolish, but because they offer a complete, if sinister, order to a complex and chaotic world. They replace 100 confusing variables with a single, evil culprit. Prejudices operate on the same principle, offering a ready-made, simplistic explanation for human behavior. These are all modern-day rituals, stories we tell to soothe the ancient panic that arises when we confront the limits of our understanding. In our quest to escape ambiguity, have we simply traded spirits for algorithms and demons for deepfakes? Yet, here lies the central paradox of the human condition. This very intolerance for the unknown, this cognitive flaw, is also the engine of our greatest achievement: science. The entire scientific method is a structured rebellion against the brain's desire for quick, comforting answers. It is a discipline that requires us to not only tolerate ambiguity, but to embrace it. It begins not with a personal reality. If our brain is so willing to invent explanations for external events, how much can we trust the stories it tells us about our own lives? The narratives we hold most dear, our memories. We assume them to be perfect recordings, immutable truths etched into the neural fabric of our being. We recall a childhood birthday, a heated argument, a moment of triumph with absolute certainty. But what if this certainty is the ultimate illusion? What if memory is not a library of archived films, but a precarious and ongoing act of reconstruction? Every time we reach back into the past, we are not playing a recording. We are writing the story again, subtly editing the script based on our present mood, new information, and the stories others tell us. We add details that never were, and omit moments that once were crucial. We become the unreliable narrators of our own lives, so convinced of the truth of our edited highlights. The memory feels real, solid, undeniable. But is it? Or is it merely the most compelling story our brain has crafted to make sense of a moment that has long since passed? A story designed to protect us from the ambiguity of a past that is, ultimately, unknowable. If we cannot even trust the certainty of our own memories, what then can we truly know? You remember it perfectly. The vibrant yellow fur, the bright red cheek pouches, the black-tipped tail. Pikachu's tail. You saw it 1,000 times, a constant companion in your childhood. You could draw it from memory. Except, if you were to pull out an official image right now, you'd be met with a quiet, unsettling shock. There is no black tip. It was never there. You didn't make it up, not consciously. But your brain, in its infinite and mysterious creativity, just made it up for you. This isn't a simple mistake. It's a profound glimpse into the architecture of our own minds. We remember incorrectly, yet we are armed with an unshakable, bone-deep certainty that we are right. This conviction is the very bedrock of our personal reality, and it is, more often than not, a beautiful, necessary fiction. The journey into this paradox begins not in the realm of psychology, but in the wet, cellular darkness of the brain itself. Neurologically, memory is nothing like a video file stored on a hard drive, waiting to be played back with perfect fidelity. That is a comforting illusion. Instead, think of a memory as a pattern of neural pathways, a constellation of connections that fire together in a specific sequence. Every single time you recall an event, that childhood birthday, a conversation with a friend, the face of a loved one, you are not simply accessing a static record. You are actively reconstructing the event. You are rebuilding the constellation from scattered stars. And in that process of reconstruction, subtle changes are introduced. A detail is emphasized because of your current mood. A peripheral character is forgotten. A suggestion from someone else is seamlessly woven into the narrative, as if it had always been there. The memory is re-encoded, now containing these tiny alterations, these edits to the past. Over time, and with each recollection, the memory drifts, morphing like a coastline under the relentless pressure of the sea of present experience. The original event is lost, replaced by a story that your brain tells itself about the event. So, if the over cold, hard facts, a memory laden with fear, the sound of a rustle in the grass, the silhouette of a wolf, was seared into the mind because it was useful for survival. The exact shade of the wolf's fur was irrelevant. The story of a betrayal was remembered in stark, dramatic terms because it reinforced social bonds and warned against future disloyalty. The precise words exchanged in the argument were less important than the lesson they imparted. Our brains are not designed to be perfect recorders. They are designed as meaning-making machines, crafting coherent and functional stories from the chaotic raw material of existence. If our memory is a story and not a transcript, does that make it less real? Or does it simply serve a different, deeper purpose? This ancient inheritance collides spectacularly with the demands of our modern world. We now live in a society that craves objective truth, where eyewitness testimony can send a person to prison for life, where historical narratives define national identity, and where family disputes hinge on the exact wording of a conversation from decades past. Here, the malleability of memory is not just a curiosity, it is a source of profound turmoil. Legal systems grapple with the unreliability of witnesses whose memories can be contaminated by leading questions or media coverage. The Mandela effect, a collective misremembering of a common fact, named for the thousands who vividly recall Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s, demonstrates how false memories can be shared and reinforced on a mass scale, creating a parallel history that feels undeniably real to those who hold it. And in our personal lives, we fiercely defend our recollections. Two siblings will argue over the details of a childhood vacation with a passion that borders on violence, each utterly convinced of their own version. We are willing to stake relationships, reputations, and even our very sense of self on the accuracy of these internal narratives, despite the overwhelming evidence that they are fragile, shifting things. Why does this certainty feel so absolute, so unassailable, even when confronted with proof of its own fabrication? This leads us to an unsettling precipice, a philosophical counterpoint that undermines the very foundation of our consciousness. If our most cherished and vividly recalled memories can be false servants, where does that leave our grasp on reality? We are left floating in a sea of our own perceptions, unable to find solid ground. The issue, then, is far greater than mere factual inaccuracy. The true problem is our unexamined faith. We believe in our memories as absolute truth. We treat the movie playing in our heads as a documentary, when it is, at best, a deeply personal and impressionistic biopic. This unwavering trust is the crooked foundation of time in the mind. Our perception of time's passage, why the summers of childhood stretch into eternities, while the years of adulthood blur into a fleeting moment, is built upon this same unreliable bedrock of memory and perception. The clock may tick with mechanical regularity, but the mind has its own secret rhythm, its own peculiar way of stretching and compressing the fabric of experienced time. And if the very past we build our present upon is a fluid construct, then how can we ever hope to measure the present moment as it flows, inexorably, into another malleable memory? Is the only true time the elusive, infinitesimal sliver of the now, forever vanishing into the story we will soon tell about it? Why does the expanse of a single childhood summer feel, in memory, longer than an entire recent year? It is as if time itself is a fluid, its viscosity changing with age, flowing like thick honey in youth and like thin water in later years. But time, as measured by clocks and calendars, is a constant, an unwavering tick-tock against which we all align our lives. The change is not in the time. It is in the mind that perceives it. The brain, it seems, possesses not a single reliable clock, but a vast, intricate workshop of subjective experience, constantly recalibrating the speed of our lives based on the raw material of memory and novelty. This is the silent, pervasive distortion of time within the theater of our consciousness. We often speak of time as if it were a river flowing at a fixed rate, and we are merely passengers on its banks, watching it pass. Yet, the brain does not have a dedicated sensory organ for time, no ear for its rhythm, or eye for its passage. Instead, it constructs the feeling of duration from the debris of experience. In our earliest years, the world is a relentless explosion of firsts. The first sensation of grass underfoot, the first taste of snow, the first dizzying spin until you fall. Each moment is a unique, densely packed parcel of new information. The brain, in its youthful hunger, must work overtime to process, categorize, and store these novelties. This intense cognitive labor stretches the subjective experience of time. A day is not 24 hours. It is a vast landscape of discovery, and a summer is a lifetime within a lifetime. The path is well trodden for an adult, the landmarks familiar, and the brain, now efficient, requires less effort to navigate the known. The processing becomes automated, The novel becomes routine, and the days begin to blur into a seamless, accelerating stream. We are not living fewer moments. We are creating fewer detailed memories to mark the passage of those moments. The richness of encoding dictates the length of recollection. So, is time truly lost, or is it merely remembered less? This cognitive mechanism is not a flaw of our modern minds, but a profound between life and death. A rigid clock-like perception would have been a liability in a world that demanded fluid attention. Their reality was not measured in increments, but in significance. So are we merely using an ancient survivalist tool to navigate a world that no longer requires it? Our modern world operates on the strict, unyielding meter of industrial time. We live by the clock, work by the calendar, and measure our lives in standardized units. Yet, deep within the skull, the old brain persists, measuring time by its own ancient and subjective standard, the density of experience. This creates a fundamental dissonance, a quiet friction between the world we built and the mind we inhabit. We feel this dissonance as a vague, persistent anxiety, the sensation that life is slipping through our fingers. A year filled with repetitive commutes, identical workdays, and predictable routines will be recalled as a brief, indistinct period, a blur on the horizon of memory. Conversely, a single day of profound grief, unexpected joy, or terrifying uncertainty can feel endless, its weight bending the very fabric of our perceived reality. A Monday morning in a gray cubicle contracts, while a minute of stage fright expands into a small eternity. The clock on the wall is a tyrant of consistency, but the clock in the mind is a poet of emotion. So, if our perception is so malleable, so easily fooled by repetition and novelty, can we ever claim to truly share the same moment with another person? This leads us to an unsettling precipice of thought. If time is not an absolute river we float upon, but a current generated by the whirlpool of our own perceptions, memories, and emotional states, then what are we truly living in? Is our continuous consciousness, our sense of a coherent self, moving steadily from past to future, nothing more than a sophisticated, continuous illusion? A compelling magic trick performed by the brain, stitching together a narrative from a chaotic series of subjective moments. We are convinced of the reality of our experience, yet the very substrate of that experience, time, is proven to be elastic and personal. Does this mean we are all isolated in our own unique temporal realities, forever out of sync? So real is also the one that constantly abandons it. If the self is the sum of its memories and its anticipations, but the feeling of now is the only place we can ever actually be, then where, precisely, do we exist? And if our perception of time is this fragile, how much more so is our control over the moments that define us? We feel we are the captains of our ship, making rational choices as we navigate the river of time. But what if the wheel we hold is connected to nothing, and the real course was set by a deeper, older, and far quicker current? What happens when the part of us that thinks it's in charge is, in fact, always arriving late to the decision? You say the words. They hang in the air, sharp and hot, a weapon you didn't know you were holding until it was already flung. The person in front of you flinches, and in the stark silence that follows, a colder, quieter feeling washes over you. Regret. It arrives a few seconds too late, a guest who missed the main event. The problem is, your rational mind, the part of you that would have never chosen those words, was stuck in traffic. It arrived only after the emotional explosion had already cleared the room. This internal delay is not a personal failing, but a fundamental feature of our design. Deep within the temple of the human skull, two ancient systems are locked in a constant, silent dance, and one of them always hears the music first. The path for an emotional signal is a lightning-fast subterranean highway, rushing through the almond-shaped cluster of neurons we call the amygdala. This is the brain's sentinel, its panic button, wired for one primal purpose: to assess threat and trigger reaction in a fraction of a heartbeat. It doesn't ponder, it acts. It is the gasp before the jump, the flinch before the thought. Meanwhile, the signal traveling to the rational mind must take a more scenic, laborious route. It journeys to the thin, convoluted layer of tissue behind your forehead, the prefrontal cortex. This is the cerebral diplomat, the planner, the moderator. It weighs consequences, considers nuance, and crafts thoughtful responses. But its processing speed is glacial compared to the amygdala's instant verdict. The feeling arrives first, a raw, unbidden tide. The understanding of that feeling, the story we build around it, comes later. Like a historian arriving to document the battle long after the field has gone quiet. We feel, and then we rationalize. Why would such a seemingly flawed system ever evolve? Imagine the rustle of grass in a primordial savanna. For our ancestors, that sound was not a curiosity. It was a question of life or death. The individual who paused to logically deduce whether the rustle was a lion or just the wind became lunch. The one whose amygdala screamed, "Run!" without a single conscious thought, lived to pass on its gene. Identical urgency when a comment online receives a sarcastic reply, when a partner forgets to do a chore, when traffic grinds to a halt. The body is flooded with the same cortisol and adrenaline. The heart pounds with the same primal rhythm, preparing us for a fight that exists only in the theater of our minds. We are equipped with a Stone Age brain, trying to navigate a Silicon Age world. This raises a unsettling, almost paradoxical question. If our emotional, instinctual self is always the first to speak, the first to judge, the first to act, then what role does our rational mind truly play? Is our vaunted logic merely a brilliant lawyer, hired after the fact to build a compelling case for what our amygdala has already decided? We like to believe we are rational beings who occasionally feel, but the wiring suggests we are emotional beings who, when given enough time, occasionally rationalize. Our conscious thoughts might not be the authors of our actions, but the skilled editors, trimming and polishing a narrative whose first draft was written by a much older, more impulsive hand. To see this in action, we need only observe the mind's magnificent, almost artistic, capacity for storytelling. After the emotional wave has receded, after the harsh words have been spoken, the prefrontal cortex gets to work. Its job is not to determine objective truth, but to create order from chaos, to make sense of the emotional storm. It weaves the raw data of the event into a coherent story, one that often conveniently justifies our initial, visceral reaction. We weren't irrationally angry, we were standing up for ourselves. We weren't overly sensitive, they were being incredibly rude. The brain smooths over the cracks in our logic, patches the holes in our argument, and presents us with a story that feels true, that feels right, that allows us to sleep at night. It is a brilliant biographer for a flawed protagonist, us. So, if our rationality is so often in service of our emotions, hired to clean up the mess after the fact, can any of our thoughts ever be truly objective? Or are we all, always, just telling ourselves the most convincing story we can? Perhaps the deepest truth lies not in the battle between emotion and reason, but in the child looks up, his small hand pointing a chubby finger at the silver disc hanging in the twilight. "Daddy," he asks, his voice full of the pure, unadulterated wonder that only exists before the world teaches us its complicated rules. "Why is the moon following us home?" The father, tired from the long day, doesn't reach for an explanation of relative perception and parallax. He smiles, squeezes the tiny hand, and offers a gift. Because the moon likes you. It is a beautiful lie, a nonsensical, physically impossible fairy tale. And yet for the child, it is a perfect, satisfying answer. The pursuit ceases. The mind, restless for a reason, is placated. It is not a search for truth that has ended, but a search for the most understandable story. And in that moment, the story was enough. We like to imagine ourselves as truth seekers, brave explorers charting the unknown territories of reality with the lantern of reason held high. But this is perhaps the most flattering story we tell ourselves. The deeper, less glamorous truth is that our brains are not wired for truth. They are wired for survival. And in the economy of survival, coherence trumps accuracy. A clean, simple narrative, even if factually shallow, is a more valuable currency than a messy, complicated, and ultimately paralyzing truth. Our mind abhors a vacuum of meaning the way nature abhors an empty space. It will rush to fill it with the first plausible-sounding story it can find or fabricate. This cognitive machinery, honed over millennia, prioritizes a coherent script, one with clear cause and effect, heroes and villains, a beginning and an end. It craves a plot. When we encounter such a story, a familiar circuit deep within the brain, the reward pathway, flickers with approval. It releases a subtle chemical whisper of satisfaction, a sense of order and safety. We are not rewarded for seeing the world as it is, but for seeing it in a way we can manage. So we gravitate towards the story that fits, not the facts that confuse. Is our quest for understanding, then, merely shared stories became the glue of early communities, creating a common worldview that dictated behavior, enforced norms, and offered solace. They provided the first user interface for reality, profoundly inaccurate, but incredibly intuitive. They turned the terrifying mystery of existence into a story they could all read together. Did these myths bind them in a shared understanding, or in a shared confinement? The campfire has now been replaced by the glow of the smartphone screen, but the ancient circuitry within us remains unchanged. The modern world, with its fire hose of information and data, has not eliminated our thirst for simple stories. It has simply provided new arenas for its exploitation. Modern media, advertising, political campaigns, and the sprawling digital ecosystems of conspiracy theories and fake news are not creating a new human weakness. They are expertly targeting a very old one. They understand that a compelling narrative will always travel faster and embed itself deeper than a complex, nuanced fact. A story about a secret cabal controlling world events is instantly more gripping than a tedious analysis of chaotic, interconnected global economics. A headline that confirms a pre-existing bias feels like a reward, a validation of our tribe's worldview. These modern mythologies are engineered to bypass our slow, laborious, logical faculties and speak directly to the part of our brain that still huddles around the fire, seeking patterns and agents in the shadows. They offer the same thing the ancient myths did: a clear villain, a righteous cause, and a community of believers. In the endless scroll of information, are we choosing knowledge, or are we merely curating the mythology that makes us feel the most secure? This presents a quiet, unsettling dilemma. If our minds are naturally drawn to the most digestible narrative, what hope is there for the cumbersome, often inconvenient truth? The truth is rarely a well-told story. It is fractured, full of caveats and probabilities, dependent on context, and often utterly devoid of a satisfying moral or a clean ending. It is the scientific paper with its "further research is needed" conclusion. It is the historical account that reveals everyone was partly right and partly wrong. It offers no easy villains, only complex systems and in itself not a single, unified entity of pure reason. It is a living archaeological site, a patchwork of evolutionary history. The most ancient parts, the deep structures we share with reptiles, pulse with raw instinct, emotion, and impulse. Wrapped around this is the older mammalian brain, concerned with social bonding, fear, and pleasure. And finally, the dazzling but comparatively recent neocortex, the seat of logic, language, and foresight, sits on top. This is not a seamless hierarchy of command, but a constant, often tense negotiation. The primal brain screams a simple, powerful story of fear or desire. The rational brain attempts to craft a more complex, evidence-based narrative. They argue, they compromise, they override one another. The compelling story we so easily believe might often be the primal brain's draft, hastily approved by a rational faculty all too eager to please. So if the brain itself is a layered thing, a committee of competing voices from different epochs, can we ever truly trust the stories it tells us? Is the mind itself an evolutionary patchwork, a brilliant but flawed kludge, constantly editing reality into a tale it can bear to live inside? You consider yourself a calm, rational person, until someone cuts in front of you in line. The anger flashes in an instant, a hot, sharp spike in your chest. It's not that you're rude or ill-mannered. It's something else, something far older. It's the animal within you, stirring from a deep and ancient sleep. This internal conflict is not a flaw in your character, but an echo of our evolutionary inheritance. Our brain is not a sleek, purpose-built machine of pure logic. It is a living archaeological site, a palimpsest of successive ages where each new layer was built upon the crumbling, still inhabited foundations of the last. We carry our history within our skulls, a silent congress of reptile, mammal, and human, each with its own agenda, its own voice, its own desperate need to survive. The calm, reasoning you and the furious, instinctual you are not two different people. They are two different epochs, momentarily out of sync. The architecture of this inner conflict is written in our very anatomy. The most ancient part, the brainstem, is our reptilian core. It is a master of the essential, regulating heartbeat and breath with unthinking precision, governing the primal reflexes of fight, flight, and freeze. It is the bedrock of existence, concerned solely with the body's rigid, autonomic state. Wrapped around this ancient core is the limbic system, the seat of the mammal. This is the domain of emotion, memory, and social connection. Here, fear finds its home in the amygdala, a sentinel that scans the world for threat long before the conscious mind is aware of any danger. Here, the hippocampus weaves the tapestry of personal history, stitching together experience and emotion to create meaning. This mammalian brain feels joy, grief, affection, and rage. It is the engine of our deepest drives and our most powerful bonds. And finally, crowning this old structure is the neocortex, the thin, intricately folded layer of human reason. This is the realm of language, of abstract thought, of planning for a future that does not yet exist. It is the narrator, the scientist, the philosopher. Social life, a powerful advantage for group-living creatures, so it was layered on top. The human neocortex, with its capacity for reason and foresight, was the latest and most dramatic addition, placed like a new crown on a very old kingdom. This process of accretion is brilliantly economical. It preserves lightning-fast, life-saving reflexes. You jerk your hand from a hot surface before the pain even registers, thanks to the ancient circuits in your spine and brainstem. But this same economy creates a profound and constant tension. The swift, visceral reactions of our inner animal, fear, aggression, territoriality, desire, are often at odds with the complex, nuanced rules of modern society. We are, in a sense, driving a high-performance sports car with a primate's brain for a steering wheel and a reptile's brain for its engine. The ride is powerful, but it is rarely smooth. Nowhere is this internal civil war more apparent than in the landscape of modern life. We live in a world of abstract symbols and delayed gratification, a world our older brains were never designed to navigate. In the workplace, the mammalian brain feels a rival's success as a primal threat to status, triggering a stress response that the rational mind must desperately try to quell with platitudes about teamwork. On social media, the amygdala interprets a dismissive comment or a lack of likes as a form of social exclusion, a terrifying prospect for a tribal creature, sparking outsized anger or anxiety that the prefrontal cortex struggles to rationalize. In traffic, a stranger's slight becomes a challenge to our territory, and the ancient urge to confront the rival clashes violently with the modern knowledge of insurance premiums and traffic court. Our stress, our anxiety, our moments of inexplicable rage are often the sound of this friction, the grating of a new, sophisticated world against the old, rough-hewn machinery of our psyche. The rational human wants to de-escalate, to analyze, to see the bigger picture. But the animal within reacts first, reacts faster, and reacts with the raw, unfiltered power of 1,000,000 years of survival instinct. Who wins that battle, in any given moment, is never a foregone conclusion. This leads us to an unsettling, almost vertiginous question. Is it simply the best tale the neocortex can weave from the chaotic data fed to it by the emotional and instinctual layers below? We point to our capacity for logic, for art, for science, as proof of our supreme control. But could these magnificent achievements themselves be the product of that same ancient engine, the mammalian drive for status, the reptilian urge to master our environment, simply wearing a more sophisticated mask? And so, when we feel that sudden, hot surge of road rage, or the cold clutch of irrational fear, or the irresistible pull of a desire we know is unwise, we are getting a glimpse behind the curtain. We are witnessing the ancient inhabitants of our neural architecture making their presence known. They are not gone. They are merely sleeping, and they dream the dreams of reptiles and mammals, dreams of territory, of safety, of dominance, of belonging. We navigate our reality through the constant, often contradictory counsel of these three minds. So, the self we present to the world, the self we believe ourselves to be, is it a single, unified entity, or a fragile, temporary coalition of competing voices, a tenuous truce between the animal, the human, and the ghost in the machine? If the reality we experience is a negotiated settlement between these warring factions within, a story told by a committee of ancient instincts, then how can we ever be sure that the world we perceive is the world as it truly is? What if our perception is not a window, but a painting, crafted by a conflicted artist? You unfold a map of the city to find your way. The crisp lines and bold colors chart a course from where you are to where you wish to be. But this map, for all its utility, is a hollow thing. It lacks the dappled shade of the oak tree on the corner, the sizzling aroma of street food wafting from an alley, the specific warmth of the afternoon sun on your skin. You know, instinctively, that the map is not the city. It is a reduced representation, a simplified guide. So why do we so often mistake our perception, our internal map, for the vast, unmediated territory of reality itself? The world does not flood into our brain in its raw, unfiltered glory. Instead, our senses act as narrow, specialized portals. They capture mere shards of the whole, a sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum we call light, pressure waves moving through air we call sound, the chemical signatures we interpret as taste and smell. These are not the things in themselves, but faint, coded signals. Your brain, locked in the silent, dark vault of your skull, must perform a miraculous act of translation. It takes these scattered electrical impulses and weaves them into a coherent story, a model of a world outside. This model is your personal, private map. It is not reality. It is a useful fiction, a simulation built for one primary purpose: survival. It prioritizes efficiency over accuracy, stripping away the overwhelming majority of data to highlight what matters most: the shape of a predator in the tall grass, the ripeness of a fruit on the branch, the edge of a cliff. We do not see the world. We perceive our brain's best and fastest guess about what is out there. This was the genius of our ancestors. They did not need to know the quantum dance of atoms within a flame to understand its utility for warmth and protection. They did not require a geologist's report on mineral composition to value a sharp-edged stone. Their survival depended on a good enough map, a model that correctly predicted outcomes. This path leads to water. That berry brings sickness. That nationhood. We are taught the legends and symbols before we ever venture into the territory ourselves. A flag is not just colored fabric. It is a dense cluster of emotions, histories, and beliefs. A currency note is not mere paper. It is a shared agreement on value, a collective hallucination powerful enough to move mountains. We absorb these maps through education, language, and media. They are repeated, reinforced, and ritualized until their contours feel as real and solid as the ground beneath our feet. The map becomes so detailed, so immersive, that we forget it is a representation. We confuse the menu for the meal. We argue over our maps as if they were the territory, defending lines on paper while the living, breathing land lies ignored beneath our feet. We live inside a story, a narrative constructed over millennia, and we mistake its plot lines for absolute reality. This leads to a troubling and perhaps unanswerable paradox. If my perception is a personal map, and yours is a different one, shaped by a unique constellation of genes and experiences, is there a real world that we all share? Science points to an objective universe governed by immutable laws, yet our access to it is always subjective, always mediated. We can compare our maps, find areas of overlap, and call that consensus truth. But is that truth itself, or merely the most popular and pragmatically useful map? We build instruments to extend our senses, peer deeper into atoms and farther into space, and we trust these refined maps more. Yet they remain models, mathematical descriptions of behavior, not the thing in itself. The tree that falls in the forest with no one to hear it does create pressure waves, but does it create sound, which is an experience of a conscious mind? The territory exists independently, but we can only ever know it through the imperfect and always evolving map. And so we arrive at the most precarious edge of this thought. What happens when the brain, the master cartographer, becomes so enamored with its own creations that it ceases to check them against the external world? What happens when the internal model becomes self-referential, a closed loop where belief shapes perception, which in turn reinforces belief? The map begins to edit the territory. A single person will die to survive, but millions will willingly die for a flag, a god, or an ideal. Why? Because to the human brain, a social reality can feel more urgent than hunger, more vital than flesh and bone. We are a species that can be persuaded to trade the tangible, breathing world for a shared story, a collective dream. This is the peculiar power of the imagined order, the invisible architecture of our civilizations. It is the thread from which we weave the tapestries of religion and politics, the two great forces that have marshaled human cooperation on a colossal scale. They ask for faith, and in return, they offer belonging, purpose, and a reality sturdier than stone. This ability is our evolutionary birthright, the cognitive leap that set us adrift from all other life. Other primates inhabit a world of objective reality. They see the river, they climb the tree, they fear the predator. Humans alone can gather and agree that the river is a border, the tree is sacred, and the predator is a symbol of a nation's strength. We can hold a shared belief in things that have no corporeal form: gods, laws, currencies, human rights. These fictions are not lies. They are the very bedrock of our cooperation. They allow thousands, then millions of strangers to work toward a common goal with a shared understanding of the rules. This collective imagination is our true habitat. It is the invisible cage that sets us free, the shared delusion that builds cities and launches crusades. The mind became a loom, weaving not just with threads of sensation, but with the far stronger fiber of belief. What is a nation, if not a story that enough people have agreed to tell, and to defend with their lives? If this capacity is so ancient, where do we find its first temple? The stones of Göbekli Tepe whisper an answer that upends our simplest stories of progress. On a windswept hill in modern-day Turkey, over 11,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers carved and hauled massive pillars, arranging them into stone circles adorned with intricate carvings of beasts. This was not a settlement. There are no signs of houses, no evidence of agriculture or domesticated animals. It was its world. It simply found new vessels, new scriptures, and new high priests. The grand narratives of religion have been joined, and sometimes supplanted, by the secular faiths of our age, political ideologies, nationalisms, and economic doctrines. We still gather in vast congregations, not always in churches, but in stadiums chanting for a team, in rallies chanting for a cause, or online, algorithmically sorted into tribes that reinforce our shared truths. We pledge allegiance to flags. We place faith in the invisible hand of the market. We devote ourselves to brands with a loyalty that borders on the religious. These modern mythologies ask for the same ultimate sacrifice. A soldier dies for his country, an idea as abstract and powerful as any god. An extremist kills for an ideology, a framework of belief that overrides the primal instinct for self-preservation. The content of the story changes, but the neurological machinery of belief hums along, unchanging. We are still storytelling creatures, seeking a tribe to belong to and a purpose to die for. Has the human need for a collective creed simply shed its old skin for a new one, its power undimmed by reason or time? This seamless transition from the sacred to the secular forces an uncomfortable, perhaps unanswerable question. If our realities are merely collective agreements, fragile constructions of the human mind, then what solid ground remains? By what final measure can we distinguish a timeless truth from a temporary, yet powerfully held, mass delusion? If one group's God is another's superstition, if one nation's manifest destiny is another's colonialism, if one ideology's utopia is another's dystopia, then are we left adrift in a sea of competing stories with no compass? We appeal to reason, to evidence, to science. Yet even these tools are wielded by believing creatures, often co-opted into the very narratives they seek to analyze. The stories are so potent, so deeply wired into our need for meaning and belonging, that they can bend facts to fit their shape. The line between a unifying truth and a dangerous fiction is often only visible in retrospect, drawn in the blood of those who believed too much. Is the only difference between a religion and a cult years of evolution. The systems that govern our inner reality are not designed for perfect happiness, but for survival. And perhaps it is this ancient, skewed machinery that makes us so exquisitely vulnerable to the stories that promise to make sense of it all. Does the very structure of our suffering prime us to accept the grand narratives that offer to explain it, making our pain the foundation for our most profound beliefs? For a single harsh word can echo in your mind for days, even weeks, hollowing out a space where it repeats on an endless loop. Yet a compliment, a moment of genuine praise, often seems to evaporate like morning mist under a warm sun, its warmth fleeting. Why does the sting of criticism linger so much longer than the glow of approval? It feels profoundly unfair, a constant tilt in the emotional landscape of our lives. The answer, it seems, is that our brains were never engineered for fairness. They were built for survival, and survival has always had a darker, more urgent bias. This imbalance is etched into the very fabric of our biology, a deep-seated wiring that favors the negative. When we experience pain, rejection, or fear, it's not just a passing thought. It's a physiological event. The brain's alarm system, the amygdala, snaps to attention with startling speed, a sentinel that prioritizes threat above all else. It doesn't wait for a full analysis. It sounds the sirens, flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline, priming us to fight, flee, or freeze. This reaction is intense and immediate. Nearby, the insula translates this alarm into the visceral feeling of dread in our gut, the heavy weight of sorrow in our chest. These regions are old, powerful, and loud. Contrast this with the pathways of pleasure. Rewards are processed in areas like the nucleus accumbens, but the response is more of a slow, gentle murmur than a screaming alarm. It's a soft chime of contentment compared to the clanging bell of fear. The neural pathways for pain are simply more robust, more direct, and leave a deeper imprint. Joy is a delicate inscription. Sorrow is a deep carving in stone. So we are left with a biological reality. Our hardware is designed to hold on to the hurt. But if this is the mechanism, we must ask, what ancient craftsman designed it this way? And for what purpose? What survival advantage could possibly lie in this enduring ache? The architect, as it so often is, was evolution. For our ancestors on the vast and unforgiving savanna, the world was a place of constant calculation. State, soon replaced by the next need. In this calculus of survival, the weight given to negative stimuli was not a flaw. It was a feature. The brain became a museum of near misses and painful lessons, a curated collection of everything that could go wrong, all to ensure the organism lived long enough to pass on its genes. This negativity bias was our most vigilant guardian, a gift from our deepest past. But what happens when the guardian, trained for a world of tangible threats, is stationed inside a modern mind, surrounded by the abstract and perpetual dangers of a digital age? We now inhabit a world that is, by any objective measure, far safer than the one that shaped our brains. The saber-toothed tigers have been replaced by looming deadlines, and the poisonous berries have been swapped for poisonous online comments. Yet, our ancient neural machinery operates by the same old rules. It treats a snide remark from a colleague or a critical comment on a social media post with the same physiological intensity as a genuine physical threat. The amygdala still sounds its alarm, the cortisol still floods our system, and the memory is etched deep. We find ourselves trapped in a feedback loop of our own evolution. One negative review can overshadow 100 praises. A single moment of social rejection can dominate our thoughts for days, while a successful presentation is often quickly filed away and forgotten. This system, so brilliantly adapted for the Pleistocene, now misfires in the Anthropocene, creating a low hum of background anxiety, a fertile ground for prolonged stress and depression. The very mechanism that was meant to protect us now torments us, holding on to psychic wounds long after their lesson has been learned, if there ever was one. The shield has become a cage. So, does this mean our emotional wiring is a broken system, a tragic design flaw in the human condition? This brings us to a crossroads of interpretation. Is this profound depth of sadness merely an evolutionary hangover, a strategy that has outlived its usefulness and now causes more harm than good? Or is it, in some paradoxical way, still serving a purpose? Perhaps the weight of sorrow is not a bug, but a feature that allows for depth of character. The blink of an eye, our conscious mind scrambles to construct a plausible justification for what we have already done. This is the curious phenomenon of rationalization, the brain's relentless drive to make sense of its own impulses, to create a story of rationality where perhaps only instinct once roamed. We decide, and then we believe we have reasoned. If our sadness runs deeper than our joy because of an ancient survival script, then how much of our entire lived experience is built upon the stories we tell ourselves to explain actions we never consciously chose? What does it mean for our sense of self if we are constantly following a path laid down by unconscious forces, only to then invent a map after the journey has already begun? You buy the expensive watch, the luxurious handbag, the car that is just a little too much for your budget. And then, almost instantly, the quiet whisper in your mind offers its justification. I've earned this. It feels like a conscious decision, a reward weighed and measured by your rational mind. But what if that whisper isn't the author of the action, but merely the publicist? What if the true decision was made in a deeper, darker chamber of the mind, and the reason you hear is just a story spun to make sense of the inexplicable? We are, it seems, not the rational captains of our souls we believe ourselves to be, but rather skilled narrators, constantly drafting the biography of a self that has already acted. This intricate backstage operation of the mind is rooted in the very architecture of our brains. Most of our behaviors originate not in the gleaming, modern boardroom of the prefrontal cortex, the seat of our conscious, deliberative logic, but in the ancient, humming factory floors of the emotional and unconscious brain. The amygdala, the insula, a complex network of neural pathways that have been evolving for millions of years, process sensory input and generate impulses with breathtaking speed. The prefrontal cortex, the part of us that feels like us, is often the last to know. It is not the CEO issuing commands. It is the press secretary, tasked with explaining the company's sudden, often surprising moves to the outside world. Neuroscientists call this process confabulation, or, more commonly, rationalization. We act, and then we craft a reason. The feeling of a deliberate choice is frequently a beautiful, convincing illusion, a story we tell ourselves to maintain the central plot line of our lives, that we are in control. Why would such a seemingly flawed system evolve? To answer, we must journey back to the savannas and forests of our deepest past. For our ancestors, survival was not a seminar. It was a split-second drama. The rustle in the grass could be the wind, or it could be a leopard. The individual who paused to ponder, to weigh the probabilistic evidence for and against the presence of a predator, was likely removed from the gene pool. Self, then, ultimately just a collection of survival stories we've mistaken for truth. This ancient machinery, so adept at keeping us alive on the ancient plains, now operates in the bewildering complexity of the modern world. Its effects are everywhere, from the trivial to the catastrophic. You are on a diet, but you eat the slice of cake. The conscious, rational mind was overruled by a deeper craving. Immediately, the narrator chimes in. One slice won't matter, or I need the energy, or I'll exercise extra tomorrow. The action is a biochemical impulse, the reason is a post hoc fabrication. But scale this up. Nations go to war, and citizens rationalize the violence through narratives of freedom, security, or divine will. A person betrays a friend and convinces themselves it was for the friend's own good. A leader clings to power, weaving elaborate justifications that paint autocracy as necessary salvation. The most frightening aspect is the brain's imperviousness to contradiction. When presented with facts that challenge our rationalizations, we don't update our beliefs. We often hold them tighter, falling prey to confirmation bias, seeking out any scrap of information that supports our story and dismissing any that threatens it. The brain would rather build a fortress of lies than suffer the earthquake of an identity crisis. If our deepest convictions are often just defenses for actions we cannot consciously explain, how can we ever truly trust our own righteousness? This brings us to a profound and unsettling crossroads. If our conscious reasoning is merely a narrator justifying the impulsive decisions of an ancient unconscious, then what becomes of our cherished notion of free will? Are we truly free if the most meaningful choices are made before we are even consciously aware of them? The entire edifice of our legal systems, our moral philosophies, and our personal understandings of responsibility are built upon the assumption of a rational actor. What if that actor is merely a puppet, and the strings are pulled by forces hidden in the shadows of our own biology? The law punishes the deed, but was the conscious mind ever truly in command of the hand that held the weapon? Or was it simply the best lawyer money could buy, hired after the crime was already committed? From the constant barrage of external sensory data. Here, it is the sole playwright, director, and audience, running through countless scenarios, weaving tales of fear and desire without any need to justify them to a waking self. In dreams, the narrative is pure, unedited by the need to appear rational to others or to ourselves. So if our waking reality is a controlled hallucination, a story informed by the senses but ultimately written by the brain, and our past is a narrative we continuously edit to suit our present self-image, then where does the truth of any moment actually reside? Is the dividing line between the story we tell about our actions and the story we experience as our reality truly as solid as we believe? You see a shadow in the window at midnight, and your heart leaps into your throat. A moment later, you realize it's just a coat hanging on a hook. You saw something that was never there. Not because your eyes lied, but because your brain, in its relentless, silent efficiency, had already written the story for you. It presented you with a completed narrative, a potential threat, before the final draft of reality could even arrive. This is not a flaw in your perception. It is the very mechanism of perception itself. Your brain does not understand the world. It predicts it. This predictive engine runs on a principle known as predictive coding. Imagine your brain not as a passive receiver of sensory data, but as a master architect, constantly building a model of the world. This model is its best guess, based on a lifetime of past experiences, about what should happen next. It sends this prediction down to your senses, a set of expectations about what you will see, hear, and feel. The raw data streaming in from your eyes and ears is not the main event. It is merely the error signal. It is the difference between what your brain predicted and what actually occurred. If the prediction is correct, if the rustling leaves are just the wind, the error is minimal, and your model of a safe, quiet night remains intact. you experience the world as stable and familiar. But if the prediction is wrong, if the rustling is followed by a low growl, the error signal is strong. This surprise forces the brain to update its model, to learn, to create a new, more accurate prediction for next time. What you consciously see and experience is not the raw, unfiltered world. It is the brain's best, polished hypothesis. We do not perceive reality. We perceive our own predictions about reality. This system did not evolve for contemplating philosophy or appreciating art. It was forged in the crucible of survival. For our ancient ancestors, the world was a place of profound ambiguity, where every shadow held a potential meaning and every sound a potential consequence. The crack of a twig could be the footfall of prey or the stealthy approach of a predator. In that blurred landscape, the brain that waited for certainty was a brain that ended up as lunch. Speed was everything. Social feeds for threats. The same system that once mistook a rock for a lion now mistakes a differing opinion for a personal attack, a statistical fluctuation for a conspiracy, a different face for a danger. Our predictive models, built from a unique lifetime of cultural input, personal trauma, and curated news cycles, generate entirely different realities for each of us. One person sees a protest for justice. Another sees a riot threatening order. One sees a scientific consensus. Another sees an elite deception. We are not arguing over the same facts. We are operating from entirely different starting predictions. We each live in a bespoke reality, a personalized simulation built from our past, projected onto the present. The code on the hook is always a monster, until proven otherwise. And in a world overflowing with ambiguous information, proof is a rare commodity. So we cling to our predictions, for they are the very fabric of our world. But this leads us to a dizzying precipice of a question. If everything we see, know, and believe is merely a sophisticated prediction, a best guess model of the world, then where do we actually touch reality? Is there a pure, unmediated truth at all? Or are we forever trapped in a hall of mirrors, only ever interacting with our own reflections? The error signals from the world do correct us, but they are always interpreted through the lens of our existing model. A fact that doesn't fit is often just dismissed as noise. So where is the anchor point? Is it in the raw, painful shock of surprise itself? The moment the prediction fails and the world, for a split second, breaks through? Or is that moment itself just another layer of prediction, a meta-expectation about how surprise should feel? To find the fragile boundary between the real and the imagined, we must look not outward, but inward, at the very moment our brain's predictions are challenged. We must observe our own visceral reaction when our model of the world is threatened. Why do we flinch? Not just physically, but intellectually. Why does it feel so deeply unsettling, so personally offensive, to be proven wrong? The answer lies in the immense cost of change. For the brain, a prediction is you've been there. The late-night debate, the kitchen table argument, the online comment thread that stretches into infinity. You marshaled your facts, built an impeccable logical fortress, and presented it with the calm precision of a scientist. Yet, the person across from you remained unmoved. Their beliefs didn't crumble before your evidence. They seemed to harden, like clay baked in the sun. It's a peculiar kind of frustration, one that feels like trying to knock down a mountain with a feather. We assume that a clear presentation of the truth is the most powerful tool for change we possess. But what if that assumption is the very heart of our error? What if truth, in its raw, unadorned state, is one of the weakest catalysts for human transformation? The real lever, the hidden architecture of change, might not reside in the cold marble halls of logic, but in the warm, dark, and ancient soil of emotion. To understand this, we must journey into the inner universe of the human brain. When we encounter a new fact, a sliver of data that challenges our existing worldview, a specific region flickers to life, the prefrontal cortex. This is the seat of executive function, our cold, calculating logic center. It analyzes, it compares, it weighs the evidence. But this process is sterile, a librarian quietly filing away a new book. For that book to be read, for it to truly matter, it must connect to something deeper. Behavioral change, the actual pivot in belief or action, requires a different kind of ignition. It demands the activation of the limbic system, the ancient emotional core of the brain. The amygdala, our alarm bell for threat and fear. The insula, which maps our gut feelings and visceral responses, and the dopamine-driven reward pathways that seek pleasure and avoid pain. This is where the magic, or the mayhem, happens. A fact presented without an emotional hook is like a seed dropped on pavement. It may be perfect, but it cannot take root. We are not persuaded by reason. We are persuaded by feeling. The truth might hand us the map, but only emotion can supply the fuel for the journey. So, we must ask, are we rational beings who sometimes feel? Or are we feeling beings who sometimes rationalize, binding the community together with invisible threads of shared feeling? Information that survived and thrived in these early societies was not the most accurate, but the most emotionally resonant. The story that made your heart pound or your eyes well up was the story that was remembered, retold, and passed down through generations. It became truth by virtue of its emotional weight, not its factual precision. The cave painting was not a diagram, it was a drama. Was our consciousness forged not in the furnace of fact, but in the crucible of collective emotion? The fire has been replaced by the screen, the shaman by the influencer, but the fundamental wiring remains unchanged. Modern media, in its relentless Darwinian struggle for our attention, has become a master amplifier of this ancient bias. The algorithms that govern our digital lives are not truth seekers, they are engagement maximizers. They have learned, with terrifying efficiency, that content which triggers strong emotional responses, outrage, fear, tribal pride, heartwarming joy, travels farther and faster than neutral, factual information. A dry scientific paper on vaccine efficacy is drowned out by a visceral anecdote about an adverse reaction. A nuanced political analysis gains less traction than a meme that paints the opposition as monstrous. We are not living in an information age so much as we are living in an emotional contagion age. The truth is often left behind, a forgotten artifact in the quiet library, while emotionally charged narratives become our chosen reality. They feel truer because they resonate more deeply within us, creating a feedback loop where our emotional state confirms the validity of the information that triggered it. Has our technology, in holding a mirror to our minds, simply shown us that we prefer the compelling lie to the inconvenient truth? This presents a unsettling, almost dystopian paradox. If emotion is the true gatekeeper of belief, then what role does reason play? Is it merely a puppet, dancing on strings pulled by feelings it barely understands? Does this relegate us to a world where manipulation through sentiment trumps persuasion through evidence? Are we doomed to be creatures of passion, forever mistaking the heat of our feelings for the light of understanding? This line of questioning feels like a surrender, a dismissal of our highest It greets it like an immune system greets a virus. This is known as cognitive dissonance, the profound discomfort we feel when we hold two conflicting ideas simultaneously. The easiest, most neurologically economical way to resolve this discomfort is not to accept the challenging new fact, but to reject it, to rationalize it away, or to attack its source. The belief is not just an idea, it is part of our identity, woven into our sense of self and safety, protected by a moat of emotion. To change a mind, then, is not to perform a simple data upload. It is a delicate act of emotional archaeology. It requires creating a sense of safety, of connection, before the first fact is ever presented. It means wrapping the truth in a story that makes it feel not like a threat, but like a revelation. The truth cannot be a club, it must be a key. And a key requires not just the right shape, but a gentle hand to turn it. So, if emotion is the lock, and truth is the key, what is the hand that turns it? This intricate dance between what we know and what we feel finds a strange and private rehearsal every night, behind the closed curtains of our eyelids. In the silent theater of the mind, the brain stages its most profound experiments, free from the constraints of waking logic. What reality is it testing in the darkness? You show them the article, the one from the reputable source, the one with the carefully cited evidence and the expert testimonials. You point to the graph, the data, the logical dismantling of the conspiracy theory they hold so dear. You wait for the flicker of doubt, the slow dawning of realization. But it doesn't come. Instead, their eyes harden, their jaw sets. They don't just reject your evidence, they absorb it, twist it, and use it as fresh mortar to fortify the walls of their original belief. Their conviction, far from crumbling, emerges from the confrontation stronger, more resolute, more unshakable than before. Why? Why does a direct hit from the cannon of fact not only fail to sink the ship of false belief, but seem to make it sail faster? The answer begins not with a failure of logic, but with a primal scream from the deepest, most ancient parts of our brain. When a core belief is challenged, the mind does not calmly open the doors of its library to welcome a new, better researched book. It slams the gates and mans the battlements. Neuroscientists have observed this phenomenon, dubbing it the backfire effect. It is a cognitive immune response, a defense mechanism against a viral idea that threatens the host. The initial alarm is sounded in the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, a region that acts as the brain's conflict detection system. It buzzes with activity when it registers a clash between an incoming piece of information and an existing, deeply held belief. This is not a signal for curiosity. It is a signal for distress. This neural alarm bell does not ring in the quiet halls of reason. It shrieks directly into the amygdala, the seat of fear and emotion. The brain, in that moment, is not interested in truth. It is interested in survival. The feeling of being wrong is not processed as an intellectual misstep, but as a visceral threat. To avoid the psychological pain of cognitive dissonance, the unbearable tension of holding two contradictory ideas, the mind makes a choice. It rejects the foreign agent. It doubles down on the original belief, not because the evidence supports it, but because the self requires it. The belief has become more than an idea, a community, to safety, to love. A challenge to our belief is not merely a logical proposition. It is heard by our ancient psyche as the first rumble of an approaching mob, a threat of exile. The content of the belief becomes almost irrelevant. It could be about flat earth, political ideology, or the best way to bake bread. What matters is that it is our tribe's bread. We did not evolve to defend truth. We evolved to defend our territory, both physical and social. To question a deeply held belief is to threaten that territory. The response, therefore, is not debate. It is war. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of our reason, is enlisted not as an impartial judge but as the tribe's most clever lawyer, tasked not with finding the truth but with winning the case. It will selectively gather evidence. It will poke holes in the opposition's argument. It will spin a compelling narrative, all in the service of protecting the status quo. It will do anything to keep the tribe intact, even if that means believing a comfortable lie over a disruptive truth. Have we, in our modern world of infinite information, simply given our ancient tribal instincts a global, digital stage on which to perform their same old play. Indeed, the digital age has poured jet fuel on this ancient fire. Social media platforms are not public squares designed for the measured exchange of ideas. They are algorithmic engines that function as the ultimate tribal battlegrounds. They connect us not to the world, but to our own reflections, creating hyper-optimized echo chambers that constantly reassure us of our own rightness. When a counter-argument arrives, it rarely comes as a quiet, private suggestion. It arrives as a public reply, a comment for all to see, a challenge broadcast across the entire tribe. The brain's ancient defense systems go into overdrive. This is no longer a philosophical disagreement. It is a public shaming, a challenge to social standing. The response is a spectacle of cognitive acrobatics. Confirmation bias runs rampant as we seek out every scrap of information that supports our pre-existing view. Motivated reasoning takes the wheel, twisting complex facts into pretzels to fit our narrative. The opponent is not just mistaken. Warfare. Yet, if every counter-argument only strengthens false belief, then how does change ever happen? How did humanity ever move from believing the sun revolved around the earth to the opposite? How do we learn, grow, and adapt if our very wiring rebels against the process? This is the paradox at the heart of the human condition. The same ego that protects us from social exile also prevents us from seeing our own flaws. The same brain that can land a rover on Mars is helpless against a meme about microchips in vaccines. It suggests that the path to changing a mind, whether our own or someone else's, is not a direct assault. You cannot lob facts like grenades at a fortress and expect the walls to fall. You will only force the inhabitants to dig in deeper. Perhaps the first, most profound step is simply to understand the mechanics of the fortress itself. To recognize that the vehement defense of a belief is often a cry of social and psychological vulnerability, not a statement of intellectual strength. It is to realize that before you can present a new fact, you must make it safe to be wrong. You must offer an alternative tribe, a new identity that can accommodate the updated belief without causing total psychic collapse. The goal is not to win the argument, but to make surrender painless, even desirable. It requires empathy, not eradication, conversation, not confrontation. But if our tools are empathy and conversation, are we equipped to dismantle beliefs that are not just wrong, but dangerous? This reveals a deeper, more unsettling layer to our reality. Our brain's resistance to contradictory facts and its tribal defense of belief are not bugs in the system. They are features of a mind that constructs its own reality. From the moment sensory data enters our brain, it is filtered, interpreted, and woven into a story that is shaped by our past experiences, our biases, and our deep-seated need for coherence. We do not see the world as it is. We see a world that makes sense to us. We live not in the objective environment, but in a personalized simulation running on the wetware of our consciousness. This simulation is our cradle, our comfort, our entire universe. And when a fact comes along that threatens to crash the simulation, the system's first priority is not to update. You feel it first in the stomach, a cold, dense knot. Then, a subtle hum of anxiety in the veins. The person you love, the one whose every word feels like a piece of your own truth, has just said something that strikes a deeply discordant note. It is a fact that cannot be reconciled, an opinion that feels like a betrayal. A part of you wants to engage, to understand, to debate, but a much stronger, more primal part pulls back, retreating into the familiar warmth of your established affection. The mental door slams shut. The conversation is over. Why is it so physically uncomfortable, so existentially taxing, to simply hold two conflicting ideas in your mind at once? The answer lies not in a failure of character, but in the deep, energy-saving wiring of the human brain. It is not built to resolve contradiction. It is built to avoid it. This internal friction, the psychic pain of holding two competing beliefs, has a name: cognitive dissonance. Imagine it not as an abstract concept, but as a physiological event. When a deeply held belief, "I am a good judge of character," collides with an undeniable reality, "The person I love has done a terrible thing," the brain doesn't calmly open a file for review. It sounds an alarm. Neuroimaging shows that this clash activates the anterior cingulate cortex, a region closely tied to error detection and, crucially, to the experience of pain and distress. This is a headache of the soul, a system overload. The brain, in its ancient wisdom, interprets this dissonance not as an intellectual puzzle to be solved, but as a threat to be neutralized. Its solution is not to seek a higher, more complex truth. Its solution is to restore equilibrium by any means necessary. It will perform quiet, almost invisible surgery on memory itself, softening the edges of a harsh fact. It will construct elaborate, logical-sounding justifications, building a scaffold of reason around an emotional decision. It will even shift entire emotional landscapes, transforming doubt into devotion or criticism into concern, all to make the unsettling world outside align with the need for calm inside. The goal is not accuracy. The goal is comfort. This is not a modern long, arduous road to truth. A quick, comforting story that allowed for decisive action was far more valuable than a complex, unsettling truth that led to paralyzing doubt. We are the children of those who acted with confidence, not those who pondered with nuance. Our inheritance is a mind that will instinctively choose a simple lie that feels true over a complex truth that feels bad. This ancient wiring now operates in a world of overwhelming informational abundance, and the result is our modern cultural landscape. We have externalized the brain's internal conflict avoidance system. We curate our reality with meticulous care, building personalized fortresses of conviction. Social media algorithms, news feeds, and community affiliations act as digital architects for our cognitive comfort, tirelessly constructing what we might call knowledge bubbles. These are not just echo chambers of opinion. They are sanctuaries of psychological ease. We click, read, and watch not to be challenged, but to be consoled. We seek out the voices that affirm our pre-existing narratives, that reinforce our tribal identities, that assure us our dissonance was merely a misunderstanding. Within these bubbles, the world makes perfect, frictionless sense. Opposing facts are not analyzed. They are deflected as propaganda, ignorance, or malice. This is cognitive dissonance avoidance on a societal scale. It allows us to live in a state of stable illusion, where our beliefs are constantly validated and our internal peace is rarely, if ever, disturbed. We have outsourced the job of reducing our mental tension to the very architecture of the digital world. But this invites a troubling, almost heretical question. If growth is born from the tension between what we believe and what we experience, if wisdom is forged in the fires of challenging our own assumptions, then what becomes of us when we systematically eliminate all tension? Are we building a society of comfort at the expense of maturity? To live in a perfectly rationalized loop, where every input is designed to confirm the output, is to live a life without cognitive friction. And without friction, there can be no traction for growth. We mistake the stillness of the echo chamber for the peace of understanding. We mistake the comfort of consensus for the confidence of truth. The past. It can soften the memory of a hurtful comment, reshape the sequence of a painful event, or even implant a justification that never actually occurred in the moment. We leave an argument convinced of our own version, our memories already subtly rewritten to cast us in a better light, to reduce the dissonance of our own culpability. We look back on our lives not through a clear lens, but through a filter constantly adjusted for our present comfort. The past becomes a malleable story, not a fixed record. So, we must wonder, if our own memories can be unwittingly tailored to avoid internal conflict, how can we ever truly trust the foundation of our own identity? Is the self just a story we tell ourselves to feel coherent? And if the architecture of our mind is so deftly designed to warp our perception of the past to avoid discomfort, what does it do to our perception of the present, especially when viewed through the most powerful lens of all? Next section. Emotion is the strongest lens that distorts reality. When we love, hate, fear, reality is bent according to our inner state, and we believe that is the truth. You remember it perfectly. The scratchy wool of your grandmother's sweater, the specific slant of afternoon light through the kitchen window, the exact lilt of her voice as she said those words. This memory is a relic, a perfect little diorama sealed in glass inside your mind. It feels so real, so tangible. Then, one day, you recount it, and your grandmother, or a parent, or a sibling, gently corrects you. That never happened, they say. Or, it wasn't like that at all. She wasn't even there that summer. The diorama shatters. A cold confusion sets in. If you didn't doubt your own mind, you might doubt theirs. But the unsettling truth lingers in the space between your certainty and theirs. Who is right? The answer, neuroscience suggests, is that you both are, and neither are. Your memory is not a lie, but it is not a truth etched in stone either. It is something far more fluid, far more creative, and far more personal. We like to imagine our minds as impeccable archivists, storing experiences like files in a cabinet, ready to be pulled out, dusted off, and re-examined in their original, pristine condition. This is a comforting fiction. The reality is that memory is not a flawless recording. It is a brilliant, if sometimes overzealous, editor. Every time you remember, you are not playing back a tape. You are writing a story. The process is one of reconstruction, not retrieval. Think of a memory not as a single, complete object stored in a brain cell vault, but as a pattern of connections, a specific constellation of neurons that once fired together in a particular sequence. When you decide to recall that event, your brain doesn't simply find the finished product. It finds the recipe. It locates the key ingredients, the sight of the sweater, the sound of the voice, the smell of baking bread, and it sets about baking the cake all over again. But here is the crucial and deeply strange part. The kitchen is different now. The chef is different. You are recalling this memory with a mind that has been shaped by every experience that has happened since. So, as your brain reassembles the fragments, it unconsciously, and with the best of intentions, palimpsest, a parchment scraped clean and written over again, with the faint, ghostly traces of all previous versions still visible beneath. So, the vivid memory you hold so dear? It is likely the most recent draft, edited by a lifetime of subsequent drafts. How many hands has this story passed through, and how many of them were your own? This seems, on its face, like a spectacular design flaw, a bug in the system. Why would we evolve such an unreliable narrator living inside our own heads? The answer lies in shifting our perspective on what memory is for. Fidelity was never the primary objective. Utility was. For our ancestors on the savannah, the absolute photographic accuracy of an event was less important than its distilled lesson. Remembering the precise shade of the berry that made you sick mattered less than remembering, with gut-wrenching clarity, that this type of berry is danger. Remembering every single word of a confrontation with a rival tribe mattered less than remembering the pattern, that facial expression precedes violence. The brain is a survival engine, not a court stenographer. It prioritizes a story that is true enough to keep you alive and functioning within your social group over a story that is perfectly accurate. It edits for impact, for meaning, for emotional resonance. It highlights the moral of the story, even if it has to simplify the plot to do so. This good enough inaccuracy is not a failure of the system. It is the system's ingenious, time-tested strategy. Our memories are not archives. They are tools, honed by evolution to be just sharp enough for the tasks at hand, and just blunt enough to never weigh us down with paralyzing, perfect detail. Is a well-honed tool that occasionally nicks the hand better than a pristine, useless one? This ancient, pragmatic editing suite collides with spectacular consequences in our modern world. We are no longer just avoiding poisonous berries or remembering the tells of a rival. We are building lives, identities, and justice systems on the foundation of these flawed narratives. Nowhere is this more stark than in the realm of law and therapy. In its powerful drive to make sense of present pain, can reach into the past and write a cause for it, stitching together half-remembered feelings, stories heard elsewhere, and suggestions from an authority figure, until a new, devastatingly real memory is born and stored as fact. This editor is not malicious. It is a meaning maker, desperate to create a coherent narrative for our lives, even if it has to invent the chapters. And this editing extends beyond the individual to the collective. Our shared memories of historical events, of cultural touchstones, of who we are as a people, are also subject to constant revision. We smooth over complexities, highlight heroes and villains to suit present-day needs, and collectively forget what is no longer useful to remember. A nation's history is not its past. It is the story it tells about its past, and that story is always being rewritten. If our personal past is a story edited for coherence, is our shared history a story edited for consensus? This leads us to a quiet, deeply personal precipice. If our most cherished memories, the foundational stories of our lives, the moments that taught us about love, fear, trust, and betrayal, are not fixed records but fluid narratives, constantly rewritten by our present selves, then what remains? What is the true self if it is built upon such shifting sand? We cling to our memories as the bedrock of our identity. I am who I am because of what I have experienced, we say with conviction. But if those experiences are not solid things but stories we've told and retold, each time bending them slightly closer to the person we have become, then the arrow of causality may point in both directions. It is not just that our past shapes our present. Our present, constantly, shapes our past. We are both the author and the protagonist of our own life story, writing and rewriting the earlier chapters to make the current one make sense. So, what does that make the I that feels so solid and continuous? Is it the original experience, the current editor, or simply the act of storytelling itself? And if the external world is filtered through fallible senses, and our internal record of it is a fluid narrative edited for utility and coherence, and our emotions are transient chemical states that own existence, this is not an end but a threshold. For if our personal memories are so malleable, what happens when an entire society remembers something that never was? When the collective editor goes to work, you think you chose to turn left. You felt the decision crystallize in your mind, a clear command from the captain on the bridge of your consciousness. But the ship was already turning. A silent, unseen crew below deck had already plotted the course, adjusted the rudder, and set the sails in motion. The captain's announcement was merely a formality, a broadcast of an event already in progress. This is the unsettling revelation that greets us when we peer into the machinery of our own minds. Consciousness is not the commander-in-chief. It is the final storyteller. The first layer of this story is written not in words, but in the silent, electric language of the brain. In the 1980s, a scientist named Benjamin Libet designed a deceptively simple experiment that would become a cornerstone of this debate. Participants were asked to perform a small, spontaneous act, flexing their wrist, and to note the precise moment they became aware of the urge to do so. All the while, their brain activity was being monitored by an electroencephalogram, EEG. The results were, and remain, profoundly counterintuitive. The EEG detected a specific, ramping-up brain signal, dubbed the readiness potential, that began a full 300 to 500 milliseconds before the participant was consciously aware of any desire to move. The physical preparation for action began in the dark, silent theaters of the unconscious brain. Conscious awareness arrived late to the play, just in time to see the curtain rise on an act it had not authored. It did not initiate the movement, it witnessed it, and then, without missing a beat, claimed it as its own. Consciousness, in this light, appears less like a president giving orders and more like a press secretary, delivering a polished statement to rationalize a decision made in a closed-door meeting it never attended. If the brain is a vast, humming factory of impulses and reactions, then consciousness is the public relations department, crafting a narrative of deliberate choice from the assembly line's predetermined output. What does it mean for our sense of self if our most fundamental experience of volition is, in fact, a post hoc announcement? To understand why such a system might exist, swift general leading the charge, but the historian chronicling the battle after it is won. It's a brilliant, energy-saving strategy. The unconscious, automatic systems handle the vast majority of life's demands with incredible efficiency, freeing up the slower, more computationally expensive process of consciousness to perform a crucial later task, making sense of it all. It weaves a coherent story from the chaos of reaction, creating a logical reason for the jump, the snarl, the grab. I leaped back because I saw the tiger, the story goes, when in truth, the body leaped and the mind then saw the reason. The brain, it seems, is a prolific and talented fiction writer, constantly narrating a tale of a self in control to explain the actions of a body on autopilot. Is our cherished sense of free will merely an evolutionary adaptation for creating convincing alibis for our own behavior? This ancient machinery did not vanish with the saber-tooth. It hums within us still, operating the levers of our modern lives. We navigate a world of immense complexity, believing ourselves to be rational actors in full command of our choices. Yet, from the moment our eyes open, the unconscious is making countless decisions. Which foot to step out of bed with, the precise pressure to apply to the toothbrush, the subtle micro-expressions that flash across our face during a conversation. It guides the hand that reaches for the familiar brand of cereal in the supermarket aisle, not because of a conscious analysis of its nutritional content, but because of a buried association with a childhood jingle. It scripts our anger in a traffic jam, our flirtation at a party, our instinctive distrust of a stranger. In every case, the feeling of a conscious decision is vivid and real. But the neurological evidence suggests this feeling is a consequence, not a cause. The urge is generated, the action is initiated, and then consciousness, like a spotlight swinging onto a stage, illuminates the event and declares, "I did that." It takes credit for the work of the unseen crew. We live our lives convinced we are the authors of our own story, blissfully unaware that we are often merely its avid readers, turning the pages as fast as the unconscious mind can write them. If our conscious choices are not the commander directing the troops, you are the myth that emerges from the aftermath of the battle, a tale told to yourself about a central hero who was always in control. This narrative is a powerful illusion, a necessary fiction that allows us to function, to plan for the future, and to understand our place in the world. It is the glue that holds our experienced reality together. But what happens when the glue weakens? What happens when the story cracks and we catch a glimpse of the chaotic, authorless machinery behind the stage? Perhaps the answer lies not in the smooth functioning of the narrative, but in its startling and painful failures. You are not the 10-year-old you, not in body, not in mind. The cells that made that child are mostly gone, replaced. The memories are hazy, distorted artifacts. The fears and joys of that small self are foreign countries you can no longer visit. And yet, you hold an unshakable conviction. You are the same continuous entity. You are you. This feeling, this deep and abiding sense of a singular self, is the most real thing you will ever know. It is also perhaps the most elaborate and necessary fiction your brain will ever construct. It is a story, woven in the silent, dark theater of the skull, a narrative stitched together from fragments of memory and sensation, all to answer a question the universe never asks. Who are you? The stage for this perpetual one-man show is a specific network deep within the brain, a constellation of regions that hum with activity, not when we engage with the outside world, but when we turn inward. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network. It is the circuit of self. When you daydream, when you replay a conversation, when you worry about the future or regret the past, this network lights up like a city seen from the night sky. Its primary role seems to be autobiographical storytelling. It takes the raw, disjointed data of experience, the scent of rain on hot asphalt, the sting of a betrayal, the warmth of a morning coffee, and spins it into a coherent narrative. It is not an objective historian. It is a biased editor, a propagandist for a cause called me. It selects memories that reinforce the current plotline, downplays events that don't fit the character, and seamlessly edits out the contradictions. Your identity, then, is not a discovered truth, but a continuously written draft. The brain, in its quiet solitude, is forever asking itself, what does this event say about who I am? And then filing the memory accordingly, ensuring the story of you feels seamless from one chapter to the next. But if the self is just a story, who is the storyteller? Other who we were, and in the telling, we became. The I was a product of conversation, of shared myth, of a story told around a fire that was eventually internalized as the solitary flame of consciousness. So, is your essence something you are born with, or is it a mask that, worn long enough, fuses to the skin beneath? If the tribe gave us a social mirror, modern society has handed us a kaleidoscope, one that fractures our sense of self into 1,000 glittering, competing shards. The digital age has not abolished the need for a narrative self. It has outsourced and amplified it. Social media platforms are the ultimate staging ground for the default mode network's productions. We meticulously curate our profiles, our posts, our images, crafting a digital character, a me that is polished, aspirational, and relentlessly consistent. We become the editors of our own highlight reels. The fascinating and perhaps unsettling neural trick is that the brain struggles to fully distinguish between the performed self and the experiencing self. The dopamine hit of a like reinforces the digital narrative as a valid part of our identity. We start to believe our own press. The carefully constructed avatar online and the fluctuating, complex being offline begin to merge in our own minds, creating a new, hybrid self. But this is a story told for an audience of thousands, and in such a performance, is there any room for the quiet, unedited truth of who we are when no one is watching? What happens to the parts of the self that never make the final cut? This presents a quiet, philosophical rebellion. If the I is merely a story the brain tells itself to maintain the illusion of consistency across the chaotic river of time, then are we all living in a neurologically generated dream? The very notion suggests we might be able to wake up, not from sleep, but from ourselves. Certain practices and substances have long hinted at this possibility. Deep meditation, flow states, and psychedelic experiences can cause a temporary quieting of the default mode network. When this happens, the narrative dissolves. The constant inner monologue, the worrying, planning, and self-referencing fades away. Story of You is also a machine desperate for meaning. A pattern detection engine so sensitive it often finds signals that aren't there. It is this same hunger for narrative, for cause and effect, that leads us to see a divine hand in a piece of toast, or a conspiracy in a random string of events. If the self is a story, then perhaps superstition is its favorite, most haunting genre. But if the narrator is inherently prone to seeing ghosts in the machine, can we ever trust the tale it tells? Have you ever been so completely lost in a moment that the very notion of you simply vanished? Perhaps it was during a long run, your breath falling into rhythm with your footsteps, the world blurring into a stream of sensation. Or maybe it was while your hand moved across a canvas, the brushstrokes flowing not from conscious thought, but from some deeper, wordless place. You weren't just listening to music. You became the music, the space between the notes, the silence that gave it shape. This is not mere distraction. This is something far more profound, a temporary dismantling of the self. A silent, internal earthquake where the most familiar landmark of all, your ego, crumbles, and for a fleeting, glorious moment, you are simply here. Not as a separate entity looking out at a world of objects, but as the world itself, experiencing itself. This dissolution of the self, this ego death, is not a mystical anomaly. It is a measurable, observable shift in the very architecture of our consciousness, orchestrated by the intricate wiring of our brains. At the heart of our waking, ruminating self is a network of neurons known as the default mode network. It is the storyteller, the narrator, the ceaseless producer of the me show. It is the voice that wonders what to make for dinner while you're trying to meditate, the engine of regret that replays yesterday's mistakes, and the architect of anxiety that builds elaborate blueprints for tomorrow's disasters. It is the seat of our autobiographical self, constantly drawing a boundary between the internal I and the external everything else. But during states of deep, effortless concentration, what psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi termed flow, this noisy narrator falls silent. The default mode network powers down. The constant low hum of self-referential thought fades into a profound quiet. In this silence, the brain ceases its relentless task of separation. The painter is no longer separate from the painting. The runner is no longer separate from the path. The subject and the object, the dance, under the vast canopy of stars, with the community's breath and movement synchronized into one living pulse, the individual I would soften, melt, and finally vanish into the collective we. This was not seen as a loss, but as a homecoming, a direct connection to the divine, to the animating spirit of nature, to the ancestors. The sacred was not something to be observed from a distance by a separate self. It was a realm one could only enter by surrendering that very self. The shaman, the mystic, the devotee, they all sought this gateway where the ego's walls crumbled, allowing a vaster, more ancient consciousness to flood in. They understood that to touch the infinite, the finite self must first get out of the way. What does it say about the human condition that we have always instinctively sought to escape the very identity we work so hard to build? The modern world, for all its fragmentation and noise, has not forgotten this ancient thirst. We may have traded communal drum circles for noise-canceling headphones and immersive soundscapes, but the goal remains strikingly similar. Positive psychology now champions the flow state as a cornerstone of well-being. Mindfulness meditation, stripped of its religious trappings, is prescribed as an antidote to the epidemic of anxiety and depression, its core mechanism being the quieting of that same default mode network, teaching us to observe our thoughts without getting tangled in them, to see the self as a process, not a solid thing. Even more striking is the cautious reemergence of psychedelic therapy. Under guided, controlled conditions, substances like psilocybin are being used to induce profound, temporary ego dissolution in patients suffering from terminal illness anxiety or deep depression. The experience, often described as feeling an oceanic boundlessness, emerging with all of existence, consistently leads to a dramatic reduction in fear of death and a lasting sense of interconnected peace. It is as if by forcibly showing the brain the illusory nature of its own central character, it can be freed from the story's most painful plot lines. If a single chemical key can unlock the door to this perceived unity, does that make the experience less real? Or simply reveal the chemical nature of our perceived simplified model the brain constructs to help us navigate the world? The ego, then, might not be the commander of the ship, but a particularly convincing passenger who has convinced itself it's at the helm. It is a tool for survival, a necessary fiction for navigating the complexities of social life and individual ambition. But when the tool mistakes itself for the craftsman, when the character believes it is the author, suffering inevitably follows. So if the I we defend so fiercely can be made to vanish, what does that say about the solidity of the world it perceives? This brings us to the edge of the next great mystery, a question that naturally unfurls from this dissolution. If the experience of ego death feels for many like a moment of ultimate clarity, a state of pure awakening or heightened consciousness beyond the petty concerns of the self, then we must ask, is this, too, just another story? Another clever simulation run by the very organ it seems to transcend. The brain, it seems, is a master of narrative, an insatiable meaning maker that abhors a vacuum. It cannot tolerate ambiguity. It would rather invent a definitive reality than sit with uncertainty. It will stitch together a seamless perception from two delayed streams of sensory information. It will fill in the gaps in our blind spots, and it will conjure a stable self from a whirlwind of ever-changing thoughts and sensations. It is a magnificent, desperate storyteller, and its greatest tale is the one of you, in here, and the world, out there. But what happens when the story breaks down? When the data is too conflicting, the sensory input too ambiguous for its usual models? The brain, it seems, would rather choose a reality at random than admit it doesn't know. It will simply make something up. Perhaps then, the state of awakening, that feeling of transcendent unity, is not an escape from the brain's game, but merely its most beautiful and convincing level yet. A level where the character finally understands it is part of the code, and in that understanding, finds a profound, if paradoxical, peace. But if that is so, if even our most profound experiences of oneness are still constructions of the mind, then what isn't? Is there any experience we can have that is truly free from the storyteller's touch? You walk into a room and you just feel it. Something is off. The air is heavy, the silence a fraction too long, the arrangement of objects just slightly askew. Nothing you can point to, no single piece of evidence you could present in a court of law. Yet the signal is clear, a quiet alarm bell ringing in the deep subterranean chambers of your mind. This is intuition, the act of knowing something without knowing why. It is the mind's ghost, a whisper from the shadows of your own consciousness, compelling you to pay attention to a truth that has not yet been dressed in the clothes of reason. This silent knowing feels like magic, a sixth sense bestowed upon the lucky or the spiritually attuned. But peel back the curtain, and we find not a mystic, but a masterful, silent processor working overtime. Intuition is the final output of the brain's vast, unconscious pattern recognition system. Your conscious mind, the part you think of as you, is merely the CEO in the corner office, receiving a finalized memo. It doesn't see the countless workers on the factory floor, the endless streams of data being cross-referenced in real time. Your eyes sweep the room, capturing millions of data points. The angle of a picture frame, the faint scent of ozone from an electronic device left on, the particular quality of light, the almost imperceptible tension in the space where a person recently stood. Your brain takes this chaotic symphony of sensory input and, in milliseconds, compares it to the vast library of your lived experience. It finds a near match, a pattern filed away from a past moment of unease or danger. The result is that gut feeling, a conclusion delivered without the attached proof. It is a cognitive shortcut, blazingly fast, evolved not for perfection, but for survival. While logic is still lacing up its boots, intuition has already crossed the finish line. But what is the source of this immense internal library? From what deep well of necessity did this ability first spring? To understand intuition, we must take a journey back to a world without safety nets. Imagine the rustle of grass that is just a little too purposeful. This ancient early warning system is the cradle of intuition. We inherited not just the fear, but the exquisite sensitivity to the patterns that predict it. We are the children of those who hesitated, who felt the something wrong, and lived to pass on that hair-trigger sensitivity. Is our modern intuition, then, simply an ancient relic, a ghost of threats long gone, echoing in a world of concrete and screens? In many modern arenas, this ancient tool has been refined into a professional instrument. A seasoned ER doctor makes a triage decision in seconds, her diagnosis a feeling before it becomes a fact, a synthesis of countless seen and unseen clues in a patient's pallor, breathing, and demeanor. A Grand Master moves a chess piece, guided by a spatial understanding of the board that transcends conscious calculation. A firefighter, entering a burning building, feels a sudden, unexplainable dread and orders his team out moments before the floor collapses. He couldn't articulate the specific cues, perhaps a barely audible change in the fire's roar, a slight shimmer in the heat waves. But his pattern-matching brain, trained by experience, screamed a warning. In these moments, intuition is a form of compressed expertise, the body of knowledge made flesh and instinct. It feels like a superpower. Yet, this same system has a darker, flawed twin. The same machinery that grants the firefighter his life-saving insight is also the source of our implicit biases, our irrational fears, and our susceptibility to propaganda. Our pattern recognition engine is desperate to find order, so it often sees patterns where none exist, connecting dots into constellations of its own making. A past heartbreak can paint a potential new partner with the brush of betrayal, creating a gut feeling of distrust that is entirely unfounded. A traumatic memory can bias the entire system, causing it to misfire, interpreting a neutral face as threatening, a benign comment as an insult. The most frightening part is the conviction it carries. The feeling of knowing is identical, whether the intuition is genius or garbage. So if intuition can be both a savior and a saboteur, a genius and a gifted liar, how do we learn to tell the difference? When does the whisper from the deep deserve our trust? A world of our mind's own making, a world that merely seems about right. It is the cognitive embodiment of a profound philosophical idea that we are never truly dealing with the thing in itself, but only with our perception of it. And if our most immediate, visceral knowledge of the world is just a sophisticated simulation, a story our brain tells us, what other certainties might also be just a feeling? This act of world-building, of crafting a manageable reality from an overwhelming universe, finds its most powerful tool in the very words we are using now. If intuition is the brain's internal, pre-linguistic draft of reality, then language is the polished, published novel. We like to believe that words are neutral tools we use to describe the world as it is. But what if the relationship is reversed? What if the language we speak actually shapes the world we are able to see? The Inuit people are often said to have dozens of words for snow, a nuanced lexicon for a put, snow on the ground, kana, falling snow, pixerpak, drifting snow, and more. This is not a quaint cultural footnote. It is a profound cognitive reality. Where a city dweller might simply see snow, an Inuit hunter perceives distinct conditions, each with critical implications for travel, safety, and survival. Their language carves up the frozen world into finer slices, and in doing so, it directs their attention, sharpens their perception, and ultimately constructs a different experiential reality. Our vocabulary is the knife that carves the contours of our world. So if language is the ultimate tool for shaping and perhaps distorting the reality we perceive, what does it mean that we are all armed with such a powerful and inherently limiting instrument? You are not looking at a table. Not really. What you are experiencing is a magnificent, sustained, and utterly convincing illusion. Your eyes are not windows, they are data collectors, capturing nothing but wavelengths of reflected light. Your ears are not microphones, they are motion sensors, translating vibrations in the air. Your skin does not feel texture, it registers pressure and temperature through a storm of electrochemical signals. These raw, meaningless signals rocket into the dark, silent vault of your skull, and from this chaos, your brain weaves a story. It constructs a table, its solidity, its color, its distance from your hand. This is the central, unsettling truth of our existence. We do not live in the world. We live inside a neural map of the world, a bespoke reality crafted inside the confines of our own minds. This map begins with biology, a silent, relentless process of translation. Consider vision, our most trusted sense. Light photons strike the retina, and in that instant, they are converted into electrical impulses. There are no images sent to the brain. There is only a coded pulse, a Morse code of existence. The visual cortex, a patch of neural tissue at the back of your head, performs a breathtaking act of reverse engineering. It takes these abstract signals and paints a picture, inferring edges, shadows, and depth from scant data. It fills in your blind spot, smooths over jerky eye movements, and presents you with a seamless, high-definition film of reality. The same is true for every other sense. The warmth of the sun, the sound of a voice, the sting of a cut. All are internal events, private symphonies of neural activity. The brain synthesizes these disparate streams of information into a single, coherent model, a best guess of what is happening out there. This model is stunningly effective. It allows us to catch a ball, navigate a crowded street, and feel the embrace of a loved one. Yet, for all its utility, we must remember, a map is not the territory. It is a representation, and it is always, by necessity, sharpened for danger, sweetened for ripe fruit, and simplified for social cohesion. We see the snake long before we see the branch it lies upon. This is not a flaw. It is a feature carved by the relentless grind of natural selection. Our perception is not a mirror reflecting nature, but a tool, honed for a specific purpose, to keep us alive long enough to procreate. So, whose truth are we actually seeing? Ours, or that of our long-dead forebears? The modern world is a hall of mirrors built upon this ancient biological foundation. We have externalized our neural maps, projecting them onto the screens we hold in our hands. A GPS is not the city. It is a simplified, data-driven representation of it. A social media feed is not your community. It is an algorithmically curated map of slivers of their lives, a highlight reel mistaken for the whole story. Our memories are not perfect recordings, but stories we tell ourselves, edited and rewritten with each recollection. We navigate our lives through these layered abstractions, maps of maps of maps. And here lies the great modern confusion. We constantly mistake the map for the territory. We argue over political models as if they were the land itself. We chase digital avatars of success, forgetting the feeling of real soil. We become lost in the legend on the map, the symbols and the keys, and we forget to look up at the vast, unknowable landscape they merely attempt to describe. If our primary experience is of the map, then in a very real sense, the map is our territory. But what happens when the cartographer gets lost in its own creation? This line of thought leads to a dizzying precipice. If all we ever experience is our internal model, how can we be certain there is an external world at all? The real table, the actual territory, these become articles of faith. The philosophy of solipsism suggests that only one's own mind is sure to exist. Could it be that the entire universe is merely an elaborate simulation running on the wetware of our brain? Science itself suggests that what we perceive as solid matter is mostly empty space, a whirl of neutral data point, but as a threat, a rejection, or an invitation, based on the emotional legends we inherited and learned. Our fears can canyons where there are only cracks. Our joys can paint oases in deserts. The map is not just a cognitive tool, it is an emotional one, and we are its fervent believers. We trust its contours implicitly, especially when they are drawn by the hand of strong feeling. We navigate by its emotional compass, so certain of its direction. But if the map is subjective, and the cartographer is compromised, then what are we truly navigating? And if the world we experience is a story, who then is the storyteller? A stray glance, in the calm light of a neutral afternoon, is just that. A flicker of movement, a momentary meeting of eyes. But pour the dark syrup of anger into the moment, and that same glance curdles into a challenge, a deliberate provocation. In the warm glow of love, a habit, leaving socks on the floor perhaps, transforms from an annoyance into a peculiar, almost endearing signature of a person. The world outside hasn't shifted its atoms. The light hitting the retina is the same. The change happens in the alchemy of the internal lens, the one ground and polished by our emotions. It is the most powerful and most distorting lens through which we perceive reality. This lens is not some abstract metaphor. It is a physical, electrochemical apparatus deep within the skull. It begins in the ancient corridors of the brain, in the limbic system, a complex network that includes the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus. When an emotion sweeps through us, it's like a command being issued from this central office. The brain doesn't just feel the emotion, it prepares the entire organism to perceive a world that justifies that feeling. Consider cortisol, the chemical signature of anxiety. When it floods the system, it doesn't merely make the heart race. It tunes the senses to a specific frequency. Threat. The creak of a house settling becomes the footfall of an intruder. A delayed text message morphs from a simple oversight into a silent testament to rejection or neglect. The raw data from our eyes and ears is filtered, colored, and often rewritten by the emotional state of the viewer. The brain, in its relentless quest for narrative coherence, would rather create a story that fits the feeling than accept a neutral reality that contradicts it. It is a master editor, not a passive recorder. So if our very biology is wired to confirm what we feel, can we ever claim to see what is truly there? This biological imperative wasn't a design flaw. It was a feature crucial for survival on the ancient savanna. For our ancestors, the cost of a false negative, assuming a rustle in the grass was just the wind when it was in fact a predator, was catastrophic. The cost of a false positive, jumping at a perception then. Just a prehistoric alarm system, trying to navigate a world it no longer understands. That primal tool is now wielded in a vastly complex social ecosystem, and its distorting power is amplified to an astonishing degree. Our modern world runs on the currency of emotion, and entire industries are built on the precise calibration of this lens. A news story that triggers fear or outrage is shared faster and wider than one that presents calm, measured facts. Algorithms learn to feed our emotional biases, creating a personalized reality that constantly confirms our deepest anxieties and prejudices. Politicians don't sell policies. They sell anger, hope, and belonging. Marketers don't sell products. They sell confidence, security, and the promise of love. They understand that to shape behavior, one must first shape perception, and the most direct route to perception is through emotion. The collective reality of a society, then, becomes a mosaic of these individually distorted lenses, a hall of mirrors where objective truth is fractured into 1,000 competing reflections. If we are all viewing the world through a filter crafted by our own biology and expertly manipulated by external forces, where does the shared world actually begin? This presents a profound and unsettling paradox. If emotion is this powerful a distorting force, this relentless editor of reality, then what becomes of objective truth? Is it an unreachable ideal? A cold, distant star we can never truly touch? Or is the very search for it a misunderstanding of the human condition? Perhaps the only truth that matters, the only one we can ever truly know, is the subjective, emotional truth we experience in the moment. The raw, unedited data of the universe may be out there, but it is meaningless until it is filtered through the warmth of hope, the chill of fear, the ache of longing. The feeling is the fact. The lens is not a distortion of the world, but the very instrument that makes the world comprehensible, felt, and real to us. So, is the quest for objectivity merely a rebellion against our own nature, a denial of the very tool that allows us to engage with existence? Perhaps to understand the depth of this distortion, we